Hello and welcome to the Fresh Air Sci-Fi Show, and I'm Joe. And suddenly there's noise in the background. I do apologise. I was queuing up the video ready to play. So in case you didn't hear that, hello and welcome to the Fresh Air Sci-Fi Show. I'm Joe.
And I'm Dave.
And I'm Philip.
And how you're doing out there in internet land? I hope you're all good. So yeah, tonight. Oh, look, I've got the thing wrong as well. There we go. There we go.
Yeah, I was going to say it's only you on screen in a mosaic pattern.
Yeah, my fault. You know,
Stained glass window look.
Yeah. I was thrown off by the video that was randomly playing in the background, and all I could hear was myself going, well, not myself, some random person, which is the person we're going to be reviewing the video of tonight. But yes, okay, well, let's hope that that is today's mistake over and done with.
It won't be.
No, of course it won't. But yes, thank you everybody who tuned in for the mix at the beginning as well. I know Leon is very glad that he actually got to listen to the very beginning of the mix for once instead of tuning in for the last song. And of course it was Leon's favourite genre tonight as well. I did a bit of house. There was a track that I was queuing up, and then I realised the time, and I realised everyone was here, and I thought, I can't keep you guys waiting. And yeah, so there you go. So,
oh yeah, blame us.
I wasn't blaming you. It was my own internal processes of going, oh crap, everyone's here. I've got to get this ready, and this ready, and this ready, and this ready. Oh! I should have just played the track. So yeah, great to see you all in the chat as well. Nice to see you there, Twisted, Tyler, Dry Apologist. Great to have you here. Haven't seen you here before, man. Had a couple of chats on the old Twitter. Leon, obviously, and anyone else. Oh, Segmentation Fault. Nice to see you as well. And everyone else there in internet land who's tuned in. Please come and say hello. Let us know that you're here and who you are. We'd love to have a chat with you. Right, so tonight, as we said, we're doing a video. The video might be a little bit long. Neither Philip nor I have actually watched this video yet, only Dave has. So, Dave's going to have to tell us possibly when we need to pause it. Although it might be quite obvious.
If you play it, when one of us wants to say something, we just like go, oi, oi, oi.
Yeah, okay, sounds good. And obviously, any of you out there who want to chime in as well, we'll try and keep an eye on the chat. I think we'll leave it to Dave to keep half an eye on the chat today, because you've already watched the video, so you know what they're saying.
Yeah, no worries. We might have to play it at 1.25 speed. He's quite a slow talker, but it's a 40-minute video. And it took us fucking 2 hours to get through a 5-minute video.
That's true, but it was 10 questions. So, we answer questions in a possibly a verbose way. Whereas this is more just reviewing statements.
Me, verbose? I perish the thought.
So, yes, okay, I'm going to quickly switch the screens around, so folks, we'll be right back. And we're back in the room. Everything looking right? I think everything's looking right. All right. So this is Why They Want You to Be Agnostic and Not Atheist by Positively Atheist. As I mentioned, both Philip and I have not seen this video yet, but Dave has. So we might have some extreme reactions. There might be some face palms.
The title is amazing already.
Yeah. Now, just to start off, before we watch this, if you're not aware, all three of us share the same ontological position. We believe gods don't exist. And we also understand the difference between the agnostic position and the atheist position. Although these words are polysemous, so we understand that they can be defined in different ways, and we understand that there are more contextually correct ways or commonly used ways in particular fields and applications that they might be applied. But without going far too much into it and probably invalidating what we're going to watch, there's not much point. So, Dave, you reckon 1.25 speed?
Yeah, that should be fine.
Cool. Oh, there's no volume. That's a good start. I had to mute it earlier, didn't I? Wind him back.
We're good at this stuff.
Yeah, we're real good. Proper pros, us.
What's up? Welcome to Positively Atheist, and I'm here to talk to you about atheism versus agnosticism and why they want you to say you're agnostic and why they don't want you to say you're an atheist. So we're going to dive right into this episode real quick, and we're going to start off with some definitions because I want to show you why it is people have this distinction, why it is theists want you to say you're agnostic instead of an atheist, and help distinguish some of the differences in between all this. So let's
so there's some atheists.
So you can see. I'm just going
Yeah, I mean, that's the first point there. It's not theists that necessarily want you to define yourself that way. I'd prefer clear, concise terminology. That's why I would prefer you to separate those two terms. But yeah, I think we're all in agreement on that one.
to throw a couple definitions out for you. Go to screen 2. I think this will cover it pretty well. All right, so if you look here on my screen, you're going to see when I look up the word theism, you're going to start to understand why there's a distinction here. The word theism says it's a belief in the existence of a god or gods. Now, it does go on to say here that it's especially a belief in one god as a creator or the universe intervene in it. But you're going to find that this is a kind of a poor add-on, and the reason why is because technically, because technically speaking, people who believe multiple gods are also theists, right? They believe in a god. They believe in some type of god, some type of deity. And this is kind of splitting hairs. And there's a reason for that too. Theists want.
Did you want to field that one?
Well, I was just going to say he's not especially wrong. That can be how theism is defined and how many people use it. But I don't think it's a particularly poor add-on to say, especially a singular creator of the universe. Because generally in philosophy, when you refer to theism, you're speaking of the God of classical theism.
Yeah,
and
go for it.
Most believers generally tend to be monotheists.
At least these days, yeah.
Yeah.
I was going to say as well that the bit that he's missing there is, even though it's saying the belief in a god or at least one god or whatever, it's the ism, so that's the concept. It's not the active belief. It is something believed, so therefore it's the propositional content of a belief. So theism is essentially the proposition at least one god exists, with the theist being the one that accepts that as true or believes the proposition is true. So I think that's one of the common things that people don't get between the difference between the ism and the ist. Because if it's got an ism, it's sort of like a concept that's out there sort of thing. It's not the actual psychological state of believing. It's like you have a communism and a communist, for example. Communism and a communist is not the same thing. Theism and a theist is not the same thing.
No. And like you say, it's not specifically referring to having the mental state, but it's referring to the content of the mental state.
To propose, which I'll dive into in just a few moments. So, theism is the belief in existence of a god or gods. Now, when we look at the word atheism, many people want people to believe atheism means that you are a person who's saying there are no gods. They want you to believe that atheists are saying there absolutely are no gods. So if somebody comes up to them and says, "Hey, I'm an atheist," they want to say, what do you mean? You're saying there are no gods? And even though that's not what the atheists necessarily are saying. Now, granted, there are atheists out there who will claim that there are no gods at all. Okay, I understand that. We'll get into that in a moment. I have personal perspectives on that, which is I don't
mean,
believe that you can actually know this. And I'll.
At least he admits that there are those that claim that there is no God. Like some of them say that's just not atheism.
Yeah. Yeah, some will say that that's anti-theism, which is just wrong.
Yeah. Not naming any names.
No.
Yeah. You know who you are.
But equally, he's like saying, he's putting the absolutely no God in there as well, and that's not the same sort of thing. Like, you might say that, of course, someone might be absolutely dead certain, but that isn't necessarily the way atheism is defined either. It doesn't have to have this absolute certainty, like with theism being the proposition at least one God exists. Atheism is the proposition nothing like a God exists, with the atheist accepting this as true. And it can be any degree of certainty. You could be like, well, this seems like the most likely thing, I guess. Or you could be, I'm really certain about this. It's not necessarily an absolute claim that there are definitely no gods in the universe.
Yeah.
Explain why in a little bit, but I want to just point out the fact that when you talk to people, they're going to say, "Hey, look, you're not an atheist, you're agnostic," because they're going to say, "Do you know for sure that there's no gods?" And you're going to have to say, "Well, no, I don't really know for sure." And they're going to say, "Aha, so you're an agnostic, you're not an atheist."
No. There's a lot of agnosticism about agnosticism.
Yeah.
It's a common misconception that agnosticism is about knowledge. There is hard agnosticism, which is someone that the theory or belief that we can't know, nobody can know the supernatural. But when you're sort of discussing a proposition, it's weak agnosticism that is usually used, which is the suspense of judgment position. So this is someone who doesn't believe gods do not exist, but doesn't believe gods exist. So they're on the fence in between. They're not committed to a belief either way.
Atheists, right? And there's a reason why they do this. But hopefully by sharing some of this information, I'll be able to help you see this, help see why this happens. So let me go back to the screen share, and let's go back. Let's look to the next tab here. I had the word atheism pulled up, and now you will notice the definition says it means a disbelief or lack of belief in the existence of God or gods. Now, I want you to think about something. Disbelief or lack of belief aren't necessarily exactly the same thing, are they? Because one entails that there is some type of positive assertion that the belief is false, the removal of belief, and the other says, "Hey, I lack the belief." So technically, under the phrase "lack of belief," technically speaking, by this definition, all babies are born atheists, right? Because babies are not born with any belief system. Babies born.
Yeah. I mean, at least he grants that disbelief means like assertion of the negative.
Yeah.
Which a lot just say, well, disbelief just means not believing.
Yeah, which is wrong. I mean, disbelief in a proposition is believing the proposition is false. And he sort of alludes to that, but then I couldn't tell if he was sort of somewhat going back on that as well with what he was saying. But this whole lack of belief thing with relating to babies, I mean, that's ridiculous. Because atheism it is a response to theism. It's the negation of theism. But even if you use this lack of belief definition, it can't apply to babies because they do not have the cognitive processes to consider propositions and hold or lack beliefs in regards to the proposition. So it's ridiculous thinking of a baby as an atheist. It's almost as ridiculous as thinking of a rock as an atheist.
He generally kind of does if he's holding to that kind of thing. Whereas although I'll have to sort of, I suppose I could defend this in a way, right? Because if you see sort of the idea that you don't believe that God exists as atheism, right? Whatever doesn't believe that
technically falls under that spectrum, right?
Yeah.
You would have to insert an additional sort of thing that it is also capable of believing or not believing something, and then doesn't believe this claim.
Yeah.
Then you could say that would be sort of the full definition, and it is often implied. But I can get why people then commit themselves to the whole rocks are atheist thing, because if you just look at the little thing, right, at the doesn't believe this, then of course whatever you put in there, even a rock is not going to believe that. So technically, you could say that it is an atheist. I get the logic behind it, although of course I think we all here accept that would not be a great definition at that point, because you're committing yourself to something that is not exactly great.
Yeah. And the one thing I will say is those that actually commit that deeply to it, I can kind of have a bit more respect for than the people who say it is just a lack of belief, but then go on to say that rocks can't be.
Yeah, in a sense, yeah.
Because at least they're taking it to its full logical conclusion and following the entailment, rather than just going, well, it is just this thing, but you have to add all these caveats in after giving a definition.
And even for agnostic, right? If you see agnostic as someone that doesn't believe God exists, and someone that at the same time doesn't believe that gods don't exist, right? Technically, if you just leave it here as a sort of definition without any implication, you could say that rocks are agnostics at that point, because they don't believe either one of these. So you need this sort of either explicit or implicit sort of addition that you'd have to be capable of believing something, and then you apply that, and then it is a proper definition, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Of course, one of the qualifiers they do have there, though, is an ist is something that applies to a person. So that can be a way that one says, well, no, it does apply to babies because babies are people, but it doesn't apply to rocks because the ist means it is a person doing it. Again, I can understand the arguments around it. I think we all can understand how people get to babies are atheist and things like that, and rocks are atheist. We can understand it. We do. We get the thought process that led you there. It's just erroneous.
There's better or more useful definitions.
And obviously, I mean, even when you're looking at this page here, we can see this whole bit where it's going into the French atheism, which obviously that in French at that time actually meant believe gods do not exist. And then from the Greek atheos, it's got a without theos, God, but that doesn't actually take the use into account. That's a direct translation of the etymological root, and its original use was God-forsaken, and then it was used for people that didn't believe in the gods of the state. And obviously language changes and evolves over a very long time anyway, and so this is the reason this whole without God thing has come in, because people look at this direct translation. But you think of plenty of words and how they translate, like pomme de terre, which is apples of the ground or ground apples, and actually that's the word for the French for potato. So you can see a direct translation isn't actually always the same thing as how this word is being used. And so again, like this without God isn't actually because they don't believe in God. It's because they don't have the support of gods, or they don't believe in the gods of the state. That is why that means that. So it's frustrating. I bet he gets onto this in a sec. I don't know though.
Literally, when they're born out of the womb, they exist, but they have no capacity for belief, so they lack belief. Technically, animals are technically atheists, and you're going to understand why the phrase atheist is actually a dumb phrase in general, and why. Hopefully, one day we'll move to a world where we don't even have a phrase for this. Because I mean, think about it. We don't have phrases for people. We don't have phrases for people who don't believe in Santa Claus. We don't have words for people who don't believe in the Easter Bunny or don't believe in the flying spaghetti monster.
I mean, do you only?
Well, we have the word adult.
Yeah, that's true. Not dolt. Without dolt. But I've forgotten what he said.
About not having a word for not believing in Santa and the Easter Bunny.
Well, yes, I was going to say, do you only not believe or lack belief in Santa and the Easter Bunny, or do you believe they don't exist? It's really crazy. I have seen people argue that they only lack belief in Santa, and you're like, what? And some people even try and justify, well, it's because it's based on Saint Nicholas and things like that. It's like, yeah, but we're talking about Santa Claus, the mythical person. We're not talking about this person that did exist back there. I'm talking about this person. It's the same like thing with Jesus. I would say I believe that Jesus, the man, existed. You know, the man that the biblical Jesus was based on. I don't necessarily think the biblical Jesus actually existed, you know, but the person that it was based on, I would say, did exist. In the same way we could say with Santa, couldn't we? I believe that you know, St. Nicholas existed, but I believe the mythical Santa does not exist.
Yeah, there's also another kind of mistake here in that most people generally accept that Santa Claus isn't real, and Santa Claus isn't a belief that goes across various cultures. Like you don't have, say, Muslims believing in Santa Claus, but you do have Muslims believing in God. Easter Bunny and Santa are generally culturally specific, and they're known to be myths and sort of fun tales to tell children, whereas God isn't seen like that. God influences thinking, decision, government, all kinds of things. It's like saying... Sorry.
This hits home particularly strongly because I used to be one of those people that were like, you know, I just lack a belief in Santa Claus and stuff like that. So
I'm going.
Yeah, I know.
Don't worry. We've all said dumb things.
Yeah. You know, but I get, you know, I understand why it happens, right? Because you commit yourself to these views. Like you have to commit yourself to these views at that point if you want to have some sort of consistency at least. And that's why it happens. But then you sort of think about it for a while, and then you're like, no, but like I really think that Santa Claus doesn't exist.
Yeah.
I really do think that he doesn't exist. And so it starts to then turn gears. I think that the comparison with sort of mythological creatures is sometimes really helpful to figure this stuff out.
We don't have any words for these people, but for some reason as a society we've decided we need to have a word for people who don't believe in a god. And I'm going to use that to help illustrate, to explain why that this conundrum is happening, why people who believe in God want you to say you're an agnostic and not an atheist, and how we can sort through this. There's a lot of discussion even in the atheist community and agnostic community about what the terms actually mean. You have atheists who are prominent online who are saying, no, I'm not an atheist, I'm an agnostic as well. And I want to explain how that's kind of like, that's foolishness, and this is not.
If they're atheists online and saying they're not atheists, they're agnostic, then they're not atheists online, they're agnostics.
Yeah, I mean, that's getting into identity and actuality as well, of how the word agnostic is defined. But this is just it.
Yeah.
I mean, whilst we prefer a specific definition of atheist and agnostic, if someone who would be described as an agnostic because they ascribe to weak agnosticism, you know, they're in the psychological state of suspending judgment, but they want to be called an atheist, I'll call them an atheist, you know. But they are an agnostic, and he's wrong to say that they're atheists who say they're agnostic. You know, okay, under his lack belief definition, okay, they are, but that's not his identity, it's theirs. And there's issues with the lack of belief definition as well. I mean, we've had plenty of discussions with it. I've written articles about the issues with it. And I mean, if it comes up, we'll go into it, but I'm sure everybody's heard me go on about it enough. But if he would like a chat about it, you know, I would happily have a conversation. It doesn't need to be live. It can be in Discord. It can be over, you know, Twitter and direct messages or anything like that. It doesn't need to be a public conversation if you don't want it to be.
Yeah. And if he ever sees this video, he's welcome to come on and chat to us.
Yeah, definitely.
And also, like, I just wanted to say, with regards to the whole sort of there is no word for people, who don't believe the Santa Claus or something like that. I think the reason why we have a word is directly sort of related to how much credence sort of the world at large assigns to theism, right? If no one believed really theism, right, then there wouldn't be a word for atheists. I agree, right? I don't think this is something too difficult to see, right? If nobody really believed in theism at some point, then we wouldn't have a word. And it's fine for me if you want to hope, that there's going to be a time in the future where there's going to be no word for atheists or something like that, right? But that doesn't change the fact that now there is a word, precisely because there are a lot of people who assign, some sort of pretty high level of credence to theism. And until that is the case, it's going to stay this way. And I don't see the point of thinking about this. Why do we have a word? We shouldn't even have a word or something like that.
That's a good point. I mean,
pretty much sorry, I was just going to say it's pretty much a non-argument that's going to convince anybody except an atheist.
Yeah, but I don't even know what it's trying to sort of say with this, right? What are you trying to say? That there shouldn't be a word for atheist? I mean, okay. I don't get what the substance is behind this.
I think it's kind of a poor argument trying to smuggle in the idea that nobody should be believing in God, so therefore we shouldn't need a word for those who don't believe in God.
I see. Yeah,
that's my take on it.
Yeah, I can see that argument being made, but I just don't see why this is meaningful or contributes to the conversation in any way.
It's a good point though that you're saying there, though, because obviously with theism, as we were talking about earlier, it's the propositional content of the belief that at least one God exists. So it's something discussed. It's a short-handed way of putting this concept in, but there isn't really a concept of belief that a real Santa exists. So there isn't this word for Santa in the first place. So there isn't a word for not Santa. And as Dave rightly said earlier, the closest we've got for that one is children and adults. But it's completely different when you're talking about something like a theistic belief. I mean, people have believed in gods for almost as long as we could talk, possibly even longer, man.
If most of the sorry, Philip.
I think I just was about to make the same point from how you started your phrasing. If most of the population or a lot of the population would believe in Santa, then we would probably have a word for people who don't believe in Santa or believe that Santa doesn't exist, right? And
you took the words out of my mouth.
Yeah, exactly. But if that were the case, then we would have the word. I have no doubts about that. So I don't see the whole semantic, at least in this situation, I don't see how it is relevant.
No.
Actually, when you actually break it down, this is actually not accurate. This is not an accurate phrase. Let's go back to the definitions again, because I want to show you a couple more. So the next word we have that we want to talk about is, of course, agnostic. Now, agnostic is one of those words, because it has this root word in the beginning. It's not a word in itself. It just like in the case of atheism being the opposite of theism, agnostic is actually the opposite of another word, which is gnostic. And what does gnostic mean? Gnostic means relating to the knowledge, especially toward the esoteric mystical knowledge. But once again, let's not ignore this part, but let's look with the broader sense of the word, relating to knowledge. Now, I want you to notice the key distinction between Gnostic and theism. Theism deals with the belief, and Gnostic deals with the knowledge. So we're
okay, is this going to be someone that doesn't know the relationship with belief and knowledge?
Yeah.
Should I play it just for a little bit longer before addressing this, Dave?
You can do.
Actually dealing with two different questions here, two different statements.
No.
One is dealing with belief in something, and the other is dealing with the knowledge of something.
No.
Don't believe me? Go look it up.
No. No.
I mean, one thing I will say is he's getting this from the dictionary, and the dictionary reports on popular usages. So he's not wrong to say that people are using it this way. It's just not how it should be used.
Yeah, but equally, he's using a internet-based dictionary that's going to be using it how people use it on the internet, not how it's used in any particular field. It's in the same way that if you were if there was a creationist dictionary, for example, and you put in evolution, it would come up with change in kind.
It would if most. There he is. It would have that if lots of creationists used it that way in general discourse.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things about online dictionaries is they will report more up-to-date colloquial usages than a printed one from last year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And go on, Philip.
Yeah, I mean, I get why he's like what he's trying to get at and how someone could get at that conclusion, because like the etymology and all of that seems to match, about knowledge. So agnostic, not knowledge or something like that, or without knowledge in a particular topic. Like it makes sense. Like I see the reasoning behind it. It's not like I don't. And I think like originally, if I'm not mistaken, but like you could correct me on that because I just heard like a brief piece of a video where Oppie was talking about agnosticism, and I thought that agnosticism initially, or agnosticism was supposed to be used in this way, but I might be wrong on that. The main point being though that today, if you read about sort of philosophy and stuff like that, an agnostic has a very specific meaning that has nothing to do with this sort of knowledge related stuff. Right. So if you want to understand what an agnostic is in these fields, then you would have to accept that today, at least, it is used in a way that is very different than what he's getting at.
Yeah. People still use the Huxleyan version as well, but generally, generally, like if you read Oppie's book, Agnosticism and Atheism, it is defined as the psychological suspension of judgment, the non-affirmation of the positive and negative.
Yeah, and in general, it's gonna be used for like a lot of other things as well. You can be agnostic about pretty much any proposition if you wanted to, not just God belief, and that's how it is usually understood in philosophical discourse, at least.
And he does kind of go on to say something like that. He accidentally makes a good point, but then screws it up a little.
Didn't the Gnostics as well? They were theists that claimed to have special knowledge of God in the 17th century.
They were
or
like
something?
the Christian. No, I think it was way previous to that.
It?
I can't remember.
Oh, in fact, look, I think it says on the right-hand side, the first century. Gnosticism is a collection of religious ideas and systems which originated in the first century, there you go, among Jewish and early Christian sects. Well, there you go.
Yeah.
And even the definition itself says, especially esoteric mystical knowledge. And that just goes to show that if more people used it in that way, then the definition would say that, even though, you might disagree on that. So this is just about usage, how it is used colloquially most, and then there are many different ways to use the same word as the Wikipedia article is pointing out there. So
and I think that's kind of what people like this tend to not forget. They're just not introduced to the idea, but there are multiple uses for these words. They just generally happen to be used only in a specific way in a specific part of YouTube atheism.
Yeah. Also, there's like a little link, and people also search for, and there's like the first thing is agnosticism. There's a little graph there that seems to be exactly how agnosticism is usually seen in philosophical discourse, circles overlapping. So like maybe we're gonna get to that. I don't know. I doubt it, but it would be hilarious if it happened.
No, he gets to a very different graph for that.
Okay. No spoilers.
Well, should we just quickly cover off agnosticism? So it was coined into the English language by T.H. Huxley as an epistemic principle, that one should not say that they believe or know anything that they do not have scientific evidence for. So even if you actually psychologically did lean one way, but you didn't have any evidence, you should stay in this middle sort of ground. And that's the epistemic principle. And then we also covered off a couple of other definitions of agnosticism. So there was hard agnosticism, which does relate specifically to knowledge of God, and it's essentially a theory or belief that knowledge of God or the supernatural, you can't have it, basically. It's impossible. No one has it. And then there's how it's usually used, as we've already said, which is the weak agnosticism, which is the suspense of judgment position. So if we're talking about how we did before, you had your theism, which was the proposition God exists, atheism, which is the proposition God does not exist, and the agnosticism is sort of sat in the middle, or an agnostic was going, I don't know which one I believe. No, I'm not convinced either way. That is how it's sort of defined. Oh, and I didn't even cover the bit of knowledge and belief. Okay.
He goes on in pretty specific detail about that later, so we could always save it till then.
Okay, we'll save it till then.
Now, let's follow through with this. Because theism is dealing with the belief in something, atheism, being the opposite, is the lack of belief. So I'm going to go ahead and just throw this out there. Let's look at this. So in this case, if Gnostic is dealing with the knowledge of something, what do you think agnostic is dealing with? It's dealing with the knowledge. A person who believes that nothing is known or can be known about the existence or nature of God. So here's what people are trying to do. The reason why we're having this problem is because religious belief is, particularly of all belief systems, is a very personal belief. Think about this. People have lost loved ones, they've lost relatives, they've lost friends to death. And one of the things that they find comfort through this process is their religious belief, the idea that they're going to see this person again on the other side, right? Let's be honest about this. It's a very comforting belief, especially if you lost somebody who's very close to you. The idea that you may never see them again is a very disheartening idea that you can come to. It's very discouraging. So religious belief is very personal. So, and I'll give you this example. Let's say I came to you and said, "Hey, I don't believe in the Easter Bunny." Is anybody going to get mad at me about this? Is anybody going to be angry? Is anybody going to say to me, "No, I want you to. You don't believe in Easter Bunny, so you're saying the Easter Bunny doesn't exist. I want you to prove to me the Easter Bunny doesn't exist." No, nobody does that, because it's not a personal conviction belief. But when we're talking about religious belief, what we're seeing is that this is a personal belief that people hear. And when you're talking with somebody and they believe in this God or these gods or whatever they happen to believe in, that's brought them so much peace and comfort in their life. When you simply say, "I don't believe," what does that say to them? It's very offensive. It comes across offensive. They get angry, they get upset, right? And so, because the very idea that
I mean, there is some that do this. Yeah, there are theists that will get angry at you for not believing in their God. Take Darth Dawkins, for example.
Do I have to?
But, no. Well, you could take him and throw him in the bin. But most theists, especially the more philosophical theists, they won't get angry at you. They might ask you why, but they won't get angry at you.
They might get frustrated if you go, "Well, I only lack belief. I don't have to support my position. I don't even have a position.
I don't have a burden of proof."
I just wanted to say hi to Khalil. He's in chat, apparently.
Hey Khalil, how you doing?
So yeah, what I wanted to say about this is, first of all, as you said, Dave, I think there are some theists that get upset about this, though, right? But that is sort of natural in a way. I can understand that as well, because especially if you believe in sort of a very horrible concept of sort of the afterlife or hell, and you believe that people who don't believe are going to get sent there, right? I can understand the emotional reaction that you get when someone tells you, that he's not going to believe in God, because Of course, if you believe in eternal conscious torment or something like that, then it would be, then you would be justifiably terrified, I think, right? I understand that. I fully understand that.
And sorry, I was just going to say,
Yeah,
and
no,
they
no,
would
no.
be being moral by trying to
Yeah.
convince you otherwise.
Yes, as well. Like my sort of views changed on this a bit, because I understand people who genuinely want to convert you or preach, because like I get that like there is a moral sort of almost obligation to try to prevent people from going to hell if you believe that hell is real. But then another thing that he said, that people go, if what if I don't believe that the Easter Bunny is real? Nobody goes, oh, prove that it is not real or something like that. Or like, but this is I feel like an artifact of almost more the atheist community than the theist community, because atheists usually tend to say stuff like, when atheists say, oh, I believe in God, then atheists will say, oh, prove it, and then I understand why an atheist then would never want to say that he believes that God doesn't exist, because then he is basically allowing for the same rhetorical device to be used on him from a theist, because then a theist could go, oh, prove it. But the error there is not to say, oh, I therefore just lack a belief. The error is in the first place in your communication skills with a theist, because you shouldn't go and bother theists in this manner, right? Because you shouldn't demand proof or absolute proof for their beliefs, because they might be justified in their beliefs without having proof that what they believe is real, right? You can have countless beliefs of things that you don't have proofs on, and yet you believe them because you think that you have good reasons, and that is all that is required. And if you accept this view, which I think I definitely think that everybody should, right, especially on these topics, if you accept this view, then you will see that it is much easier for you to say, like, oh, I actually don't believe that God, like I believe that gods don't exist, because then you see that, you can't be targeted in the same way, because you know that you can justify these beliefs even if you can prove that there is no God or something like that. So that is, I think, something that is very important and should be sort of understood by as many people as possible in these things, in these exchanges.
I mean, it's the common misunderstanding of the burden of proof on a belief. Simply holding a belief doesn't require any external justification. It's all internal, unless you're trying to convince someone to believe your belief. But even then, it's still not necessarily to prove it true, unless you're saying it definitely is true. I mean, a really simple one that we could just spitball here, right? Here's a proposition. Joe is moving to Bournemouth next week. What's your attitude towards that proposition, Philip?
Well, I believe it.
Okay. And why do you believe it?
Because I've seen some good evidence that you are actually moving. I've seen, I have good reason to think that you're a honest person. I've seen many sort of messages and sort of you interact on these things, and the environment change behind you, and all of these things that sort of give me a positive sense that you're probably telling the truth.
There you go. That is the burden of proof met on a belief. Now, obviously, that's a smaller belief. It doesn't necessarily require as much justification as believing in a God or disbelieving in a God or lacking belief in a God. That still carries a burden, It still does. It doesn't matter what position you hold as a response. As long as it's a response to something, you still have that justification that you should do. But that is just a really simplistic example of how you can actually believe that sort of thing, how you can actually justify that sort of thing.
And many atheists sort of do that inadvertently, right? Because atheists will say, oh, I believe that, I don't think that God, can exist with this thing that happened to me, or my daughter died or something, right? And I can't think that God will allow that to happen. Right, that is justification. You're doing it. Right? You're giving reasons why you think that sort of atheism is reasonable, why believing that gods do not exist is a reasonable position. You're giving justification. That's all that is required of you. You don't have to get into, I don't know, a huge philosophical discussion on these things. right? Although I think it would be helpful for most people to understand these things, especially if you want to talk about them. But like, you still, like, this is all that is required of you to justify a belief. You don't have to prove. And if someone tells you, oh, prove it, then, then they are in the wrong here. They don't understand how beliefs work. That is their fault. It's not your fault because you can't prove something that you believe. Because you can prove, like, a lot of things that you believe, you probably can't prove. You can't prove that, yesterday that your memory is reliable, or that like other minds exist, all these sorts of other things, right? And as well, if a friend comes over and says to you, oh, I saw something in the park yesterday, you're not going to go, oh, prove it to me, or I'm not going to believe you, or something like that. That is stupid. Like, it's just, yeah. So I wish this would be clear, at least in these domains of discourse.
Someone could not believe in their particular version of God, or that God exists, makes them question their own view of reality, right? It makes them have to take a moment and reflect on their own belief and say, yeah, what evidence is there for this, right? But people's minds, they experience something called cognitive dissonance, where you have two conflicting beliefs that conflict in your mind, and honestly, it creates a literal physical pain in the body, a sensation of pain. And when we experience pain, what do? We either fight.
Yeah, I'm not sure what he's saying here is quite correct, because when you say, I don't believe that, to, say, a theist, they don't immediately turn to themselves and go, oh yeah, you're right, I have no evidence for this. Because most of them believe based on certain evidences.
Definitely. But then
it's usually... Sorry, I was just going to say it's usually the atheist that is claiming that there's no evidence, not the theist.
That's what I was going to say.
Yeah, sorry.
No, it was me interrupting you.
It amazes me how much of the atheist community will just, sort of assume that theists actually, that they're comfortable in their lives while believing that there is no evidence for God and still believing in God, right? Like, that is not what happened. That is not what is happening. Like,
no.
whether for good or bad reasons, people usually tend to have reasons for their beliefs. And for you to go, oh, they just believe without evidence, right? It might be true that there is no evidence. I disagree with that strongly, but that is another point, right? But you just saying that, it doesn't mean that they actually feel this in the same way. They're not there sitting comfortably, accepting that there is no evidence yet still believing.
It's back to the issue of what is evidence. And the people think that unless it's completely conclusive, scientific, testable, repeatable evidence, it's not evidence. And that's not what evidence is. Evidence is something that is indicative of a conclusion. It doesn't have to be good evidence. It doesn't have to be strong evidence. But it doesn't even have to be convincing evidence. It's still evidence, which is why holy books are evidence for that particular religion.
Yeah, the evidence just has to raise the probability for the claim to be true, and that's it, really.
Yeah.
And one thing I will say is, there are theists that accept that they have no good reason to believe in God. They're called fideists. But he's mistaking all theists for fideists.
Yeah, sorry, that's what I wanted to say.
Yeah. Oh no, sorry. I knew that. It's just just in case he catches this, or another atheist that thinks like him catches this. There are theists that do believe without evidence, but you're mistaking a small portion for the whole.
Yeah.
Or flight, right? And so it creates this reaction, we're ready to get into an altercation, right? So this physical pain creates this reaction where the person, instead of self-reflecting and saying, okay, what reasons do I have to believe in this thing? Because here I'm confronted with somebody who doesn't. Instead of self-reflecting, what they want to do is they want to turn it around on you to put the burden on you, right? Because they don't want to have to defend their position. They want to turn it around and say that I'm not being irrational. They want to say you're being irrational for not believing what I say is true, right? And this is what happens when people get confronted with realities that are not comporting to what they think is true, right? You have a person who believes this, they believe it sincerely, they've based their entire life on it, and here you are, a person coming to them not believing it. Obviously, you're crazy. Obviously, you're irrational. So what they want to do is they want to flip the script on you.
Well, I will say here, if we're talking about it being irrational, if you can't justify why you don't believe, then you are.
Yeah, kind of. Also, is he projecting the atheist community here? Because a lot of them get very angry when you mention that, philosophy counts and atheism is not just a lack of belief.
Yeah, but this is sort of as well, it's natural, right? Like if you hold a belief very strongly, then if someone comes by and says, I don't believe that, then you're going to feel threatened, right? Because it's like, how is it possible? It's normal. This is true for every belief that you come across, including people who very much believe that atheism is just a lack of belief, by the way. This happens often as well. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, as Chesh says, a lot of people don't even accept personal experience as evidence. I mean, this is known as like anecdotal evidence. This thing happened to me. I'm telling you an anecdote about something. Right. Anecdotal evidence. I mean, it's in the title. It doesn't make it good evidence. It doesn't make it strong evidence. It doesn't make it transferable evidence or convincing for anyone else. But it will have convinced the person. Someone who has had a strong religious belief will be strong religious experience will actually have that, and that'll be strong evidence for them. It's just not particularly good evidence for anyone else. And, you could make arguments that, well, the mind is not necessarily particularly reliable and all those sorts of things. Yeah, that's fine. But there you go. You've got your justification for why you don't accept their anecdote. And there we go. We've got this game of badminton that we're playing back and forth again, hitting things from side to side of, well, this was my evidence. Well, this is why I don't accept that evidence. And, well, this is the other thing that I've got to justify. And it's a conversation that goes back and forth. You might not be able to convince each other, but at least you'll be able to have a decent conversation and justify your position. Hopefully.
And they want to make it so that you look like the fool. And this is an intentional word game that people who are in religion want to play. So what's happened is this has created a misnomer in how we use these words, so much so that's actually rendered some of these words completely useless, right, in conversation. Let me explain. You'll notice that the word, let me go back to the, I'm going to share the screen one more time with you. You'll notice the word agnostic has a couple of other usages as well. Relating to it's anything beyond material phenomena, a person who claims to have faith. There are other definitions about agnosticism that actually goes into a little more depth, but generally speaking, regarding the existence of things. But more modern wise, and if you look back at original uses of agnosticism, have revealed that you can actually be agnostic about anything. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing for a second. So I could be agnostic, for instance, about the Easter Bunny. I can be agnostic about name anything, unicorns, anything like supernatural, extra like beyond the material world. I can be agnostic about anything. I'm going to give you a great example of something you can be agnostic about.
You could be agnostic about evolution and the shape of the Earth, but like the Easter Bunny, it doesn't mean that it's a rational position to hold always.
Yeah, I was just going to say that. You shouldn't be agnostic about the Easter Bunny. If you are, you should think better.
Yes.
That's not religiously motivated. You've been to a fair or been to a school event where they have this little game called How Many Jelly Beans Are in the Jar? So I'm going to share my screen real quick and give you an example of this.
He actually messes it up.
So let's look at, if you've ever been to one of these festivals, you'll run across some little games where they say, oh, hey, guess how many jelly beans are in this jar? And you'll win like, say, $100 or something like this, right? So you'll have people come up to this jar and they'll be like, I think you may come up with all sorts of different ideas. So let's say you come up to the jar and let's say Jason comes to the jar and he says, I think there are 350 jelly beans in the jar. Let's say Max comes up to the jar and says, I think there are 400 jelly beans in the jar. And let's say you come up to the jar and you say, I believe that there are 265 jelly beans. Now, I've actually known people who have actually won this game before. So they've actually correctly guessed it. I have a friend that one time guessed her was like 157, I think it was, and she actually won. She won like $100 for getting that right. But the reason why I'm giving you this example is because this is a great example of how you can be agnostic about things beyond religious things. So I'm going to ask you a question. Do any of these people actually know how many jelly beans are in the jar? The answer, of course, is no. No, they don't. Nobody knows how many jelly beans are in a jar unless you put them in there. So because of that, everybody in this group is technically agnostic regarding the number of jelly beans that are in the jar, because no one is claiming to have knowledge. Okay, so you can be agnostic about anything, any subject. You can be agnostic if you have a belief or not, and you don't claim certain knowledge.
But so now he's trying to say agnosticism is when you don't claim to have knowledge. So he's switched it up.
That's what that's what a lot of these things generally tend to do. They'll say agnosticism and Gnosticism relate to knowledge, but then switch it over to claim to have knowledge.
So if you did have knowledge, but you didn't claim to have it, would you then still be agnostic under that definition?
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, what would it mean to have knowledge? If you were to say Gnosticism is a claim that you have knowledge, what happens when you actually have knowledge? You can't be a Gnostic, because then you're just claiming to have knowledge about claiming to have knowledge.
Dear. Are we getting into the realms of epistemological nihilism, though? There is only claims of knowledge because there is no knowledge.
There is no knowledge, yeah. But he also kind of messes up the gumball analogy here, because it's not about even. Yeah, that's it. And to show that there is a middle ground between two positions, which is not believing either proposition to be true.
Yeah.
So just to cover that one off briefly, as I'm sure most people who are watching are fully aware, it's basically the proposition would be the gumballs in here or the jelly beans in here are odd, and you would either think it true, and you would answer that yes, it's odd. You would think it false, and you would think it therefore it is even, or you wouldn't know either way, you know, you'd be uncertain. And when I'm using know there, I'm not using it as knowledge. As I covered off in the article, knowledge and information, the word know doesn't always mean knowledge, which is, I mean, language, it's confusing. And so many words are so intertwined and so interchangeable. It can be hard to keep up with this sort of thing.
Yeah, and in his example, right, if you look at it from a perspective of, you know, there is, like, someone says, oh, there is this number of jelly beans in the jar. I think it's pretty easy to justify, you know, belief in the negation of that view, right? Like, belief that there is not this specific numbers of jelly beans in the jar can be, I think, quite easily justified by, like, you could be agnostic on it, right? You could say, oh, I'm not sure about that. And that would be a reasonable position as well. But I think, you know, just if you look at the probability of it being that exact number, right, you could justify your belief that it is not that number through that alone.
You've got a 1 in 400. There were 400 in his chance. A 1 in 400 chance of being correct. So you're more justified to not believe them than any other position in regards to that.
Yeah. So believing the negation of any specific number is actually, you know, reasonable. Yeah. In that specific scenario.
You are technically agnostic. So so when somebody asks I ask somebody, hey, are you if somebody says define themselves as, especially if we're having a conversation about spirituality, and they say, well, I'm agnostic. Here's the reason why atheists like me get frustrated with that, is because saying you're agnostic doesn't actually answer the question as to whether or not you believe in a God, right? All you're saying agnostic is, I'm agnostic, meaning I don't claim to have knowledge either way. That's fine.
No. When it's used in that regard, it's saying that they're on the fence between the propositions of theism and atheism. They don't believe a God exists, and they don't believe a God does not exist.
But notice this is the little thing that's stuck.
Sorry, Dave.
I was just going to say, using the standard kind of modern philosophical definition, you would be saying, I don't believe a God exists. The whole thing, I don't know, isn't a knowledge. It isn't imparting a knowledge claim. It's imparting a doubt. Like, oh, I don't know. Where's your car keys? I don't know. Where's the kids?
Uncertainty.
I don't know, and I hope they don't come home.
I did just caught that end one.
Sorry.
I like it.
In there, when you're talking to a theist or you're talking to somebody who's from that perspective, what they want to do is they want to shift the conversation from your belief to your knowledge claim, right? They want to differentiate the two, because if they can make it look like that you are being irrational, they can push you into a position that you're not actually saying you are. They want you to say, instead of saying, I don't believe, they want you to say, oh, there could be, there could not be, right? They want you to emphasize that, because that makes them feel better about their lack of evidence when it comes to the perspective on this, on the religious claims. So let me give you a better, let me give you a good
second.
Oh, shit. I just wound it back by mistake.
You bastard.
Where were we?
It was 16 something, 16, I think, 1605, maybe? I don't know, something like that.
I do apologise for that. I missed the play button.
I have to admit, I do like his lighting in his living room.
Is it a blue screen? A green screen?
No, it doesn't look like it. Although the gradient on it, now that I think about it.
Yeah, it's also the way it shapes around his ears. But I suppose that could also be the lighting.
Just the backlighting fluorescent.
Yeah. Sorry, anyway.
Well, I was just going to say, he said that when people want you to answer that you're an agnostic, they want you to admit that you're on the fence. But when you say that you just lack belief and you don't believe the opposite proposition, you're saying the same thing. You're saying, well, I don't believe he doesn't exist. I just don't believe he does, which is the same thing.
Exactly.
Yeah. And then another thing, right? Like, I get that under his view of what agnostic means, right? This is sort of playing this game. Like, I understand his rationale behind this, right? Because he says, oh, if agnostic is about knowledge, then they just sort of point at you and say, like the thing with knowledge, right? The game with knowledge, and that you don't have to justify all of that. But like, if you understand agnosticism as most theists, at least philosophically, sort of literate theists will understand agnosticism as this sort of, I don't believe this and I don't believe in the other way either. Then they are answering very precisely where they stand on the whole sort of issue. Like, you couldn't be more precise than that. In a way, saying that you're an atheist under your definition is more vague than saying that you're agnostic. Agnostic is actually more precise, because it tells you exactly how your own look on both the proposition that God exists and its negation. It gives you both like the complete information.
Yeah.
While in the usual sort of lack theism sort of sense, you have people who just lack a belief and people who believe the negation, something like that. So by saying that you're an atheist, you're actually not specifying which one you are. If you're an agnostic in a traditional sense, or if you're sort of an atheist in the traditional sense.
And also, don't forget, there's a number of different types of non-theist, and just calling them all atheist, again, is incredibly vague. And there's different types of lacking belief. So, again, there's different answers to the proposition God exists.
And another thing that I see very often happen is people think that they can just lack a belief in the proposition that God exists, right? Like that they sort of somehow isolate that, and that is just what they have. But in reality, that's never the case, right? Because at least in a traditional sense, you will always either believe or not believe in the negation of that proposition.
Yeah.
Like, it's either one of them. It has to be. Like, it's either you believe in the negation or you don't believe in the negation. Like, you will have to answer that. You cannot just stay in this corner of yours and then be like, oh, I just lack a belief in this, right? Because like, that is basically excluded middle, right? You have to give an answer for that. If someone asks you, you have to give an answer. You either believe or not, don't believe in the negation. And so that basically gives you the answer, the complete answer, because then you are either an agnostic if you don't believe in the negation, or you are traditionally what we, in philosophy of religion at least, is called an atheist if you believe in the negation.
Yeah. And the separating it into agnostic atheism and Gnostic atheism still doesn't cover both parts of the positive and negation of the affirming and the disaffirming of the proposition. Because if agnostic atheist doesn't believe and doesn't claim to know, Gnostic atheism doesn't cover it because it doesn't believe but claims to know no God exists. But, what about people like us who don't believe, don't claim to know God doesn't exist, but hold the belief that he does?
Exactly. That is an incomplete way to look at it as well.
Yeah.
And then people will say, oh, well, but, why not keep it just to this proposition, right? Why bring the negation into this whole definition mess? And they will say, this is not, like, what I would say to that is, this is not a random proposition that you're bringing in. It's not like we define things about, oh, do you believe God exists or not? And then, do you believe that the earth is round or not? And then we take these two completely unrelated propositions and we give definitions over these propositions. Because essentially, when we talk about the negation of a proposition, it is essentially just a position on the same proposition. It is just saying that proposition is false. It is not some sort of other proposition, some random thing that you're bringing in. It is the same proposition, just saying that it is false. And these sort of, the negation of a proposition and the proposition itself are related by many laws of logic, fundamental laws of logic, like excluded middle, like non-contradiction, all of that. That is just, they are intrinsically related, these two propositions. And again, as I said, they are not really even two propositions in a way, because they just, it's the same proposition, either true or false.
Yeah, it's the same propositional content. It's just the attitude towards the proposition.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I did an article, you won't believe this, that sort of tried to explain propositions and attitudes towards the proposition. And it's, a proposition is something that can be true or false. So a God either exists or does not exist. A light switch is on or off. Dimmers don't make any difference. It's still either on or off. It's just different brightness. So don't try and confuse it with that. It's either on or off, right? So you then have to answer your belief position. So on each half of that proposition, the true or the false, you either do or don't believe, right? So you can sort of believe one and not the other, or not believe one and believe the other, or not believe both of them. You could also believe both of them, but that's an incredibly irrational point to be in, because a light switch can't be on or off. A God can't exist and not exist at the same time, sort of thing. So we tend to not put that one in there. We talk about the three epistemic answers to a proposition. Now, you might give different answers, like people do to God exists. You get an agnostic that will say something like, that's agnostic, not agnostic, that say, the concept of God is so ill-defined and incoherent that it's meaningless to even bother consider it. So I'm not going to. So they do technically lack a belief both ways like an agnostic, but it's a very different kind of thing. They haven't actually answered the proposition. They haven't considered the evidence for and against and all the arguments and things like that. They've just gone, nah, not even going to bother.
You don't even know if it is a proposition, so you cannot answer if you believe or don't believe in it, because if you can believe or not believe in a proposition, but if you're not sure that it is a proposition, then you cannot even have an attitude towards that. So that would be sort of the way I understand agnosticism.
From that perspective, what they want to do is they want to shift the conversation from your belief to your knowledge claim. Right? They want to differentiate the two, because if they can make it look like that you are being irrational, they can push you into a position that you're not actually saying you are. They want you to say, instead of saying, I don't believe, they want you to say, oh, there could be, there could not be, right? They want you to emphasize that, because that makes them feel better about their lack of evidence when it comes to their perspective on this, on the religious claims. So let me give you a good example of what I mean by this. This is, most people want atheism to look like most people want the conversation to look like this. They want the conversation.
This part's
like
kind of painful. Just a warning.
We fast forward.
They want to make atheism.
No, you've got to see it.
To mean certain claim that God doesn't exist. And they want agnosticism to be over here. Or, yes. And they want this to be uncertain, meaning uncertain. Okay. Then they want themselves to be here in the middle, believer. Because what they want to do is they want to make it look
that
like
was my face.
over here,
What?
then you're irrational. So that way they can say, oh, atheism is irrational. Not believing in God is irrational because you have no justification. And then they want themselves to look like the best position because they are people who, quote unquote, are striking the balance between science and belief. They also, and what they want over here is they want to be able to say,
I don't think anyone that knows anything about agnosticism past, the internet fuckery, would think this. Anyone that knows anything about propositional logic and how atheism and theism and agnosticism are defined within philosophy would think this. So I've got no clue how he'd get this.
This doesn't make sense anyway.
No.
Because you're having a scale, presumably on the belief that God does not exist, right? That goes from the sort of I'm certain about a proposition to I'm certain about a proposition. Then the believer is supposed to be in between.
Yeah.
And the definition should give you the balance.
Yeah. God exists. God does not exist. Agnostic in the middle. That's how that one should look.
Yeah. Like, I don't understand how you put believer in between if you're talking about people.
No,
I just don't get.
It broke my brain. I basically sat there going, huh?
Yeah.
I mean, if he was to just flip the believer in the agnosticism, he would have got accidentally right.
Yep.
Yeah. Yes.
Well, this person is not saying I'm wrong, right? They're saying I could be right. And if they say I could be right, then it makes their position like it's somewhat reasonable, even if, and this is the big thing, even if they have no facts to support them. Okay?
And
so,
I mean, really?
I mean, if he's using this as like a scale of rationality, because he's saying that the agnostic is telling the believer that he's the rational one, that would make both ends of the scale irrational.
Yeah.
Or some weird kind of thing. But I will say, most most agnostic atheists wouldn't create the chart like this. They would put agnostic atheism in the middle.
Yeah.
Agnostic atheism at one end and theism at the other, or they'd do
probably
the
have four. They'd have four.
Quadrant.
They'd either do it in the quadrant, or they'd do it if they were going to do it in a single line. You'd have the agnostic theist and agnostic atheist there, and then the gnostic theist, and going further out.
Or I've seen people that just have a line for on one side it's believe that God does exist, and sort of on the other is believe that not believe that God does exist. So sort of a lack of belief that a God exists. But there's an obvious missing part here, which is for the people that actually believe that God does not exist. So you should extend that, and that's all that we are saying, right? If you extend that, then you have all the positions that we're talking about. Then it's just a matter of what labels you prefer to attach to them, and at that point, it's not really an interesting conversation. Not as interesting a conversation as sort of the conceptual basis of it.
Yes, as a believer, I admit I have no facts to support myself. But hey, guess what? All the reasonable people say I could be right. So by shifting the burden of proof, they are able to say, well, there is no such thing as a reasonable atheist because atheists are saying that there are no God. But that's not true. When you look at the definitions, let's look at them again. Theism is the belief. Atheism is the lack of belief. So we're dealing with belief. Gnostic is dealing with knowledge, related to especially claiming the knowledge of something, especially esoteric. Now, this is regarding religion specifically in that case. And then agnostic means that this person says nothing can be known or not known. This is once again dealing with knowledge. So how would this look on a graph? If the other graph is wrong, how would this look on a graph that is more accurate? And I'm going to share with you a graph real quick that I thought was very enlightening.
Don't be the quadrant.
So
don't be the quadrant. Oh,
Yeah.
it's the quadrant.
It's the quadrant.
This is a better representation of what we need.
Oh.
I mean, at least it's a different one than normal.
Yeah. No, this is a step up from what we just looked at. Definitely.
Yeah. I do hate the quadrant though.
Me too.
And again, you're right, Dave. They're using Gnostic and as agnostic as claims to know, not actually having knowledge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So okay. And again, our position isn't on here. We believe gods don't exist. So where do we sit on here?
Maybe we're the golden mean right in the middle.
Right,
It's not labeled because there's not enough space to fit the text in.
Yeah, and as you said before, like you would need an entire different quadrant for the proposition, for the negation of the proposition. God exists. Like there are many problems with this. Like it sort of gives an idea that sort of knowledge is a degree of certainty as well. Sometimes, it has a bit of a confused idea about what these terms mean. I will say I don't think it's sort of logically incoherent in the sense that there is any sort of contradiction in defining the terms in this way. But that's a pretty low bar to clear. It's still it misses a pretty big part of the story, in my opinion, which is the main issue that I have with this. Not to mention creates confusion.
Yeah, that's always been my problem with it. It's half the story.
Yeah.
And it shows that there isn't much of an understanding between, belief and knowledge.
Yeah, and at least if people would use this graph, and would understand, though, that there is a large chunk of people who use agnostic in a completely different way and would be willing to accept that, I would be happier with that. I would be happier with that because at least, you say, oh, I use agnostic this way. Sure, I don't particularly think that is efficient or anything, but at least you understand that there are people there that use agnostic as not believe either way, and therefore you can understand these other people. But when you have people that define themselves as agnostic, and then you have like 50 people that come in there and are like, no, you're not agnostic, because you sort of like you do believe or you don't believe, or then they conflate, or or you don't know, and all of this stuff then becomes just painful for the people who actually want to use agnostic in the in my opinion better way.
Yeah, and a chart like this forgets about something like Moore's paradox. If you're claiming to know, then you're already claiming to believe, because if you say, like, I know something, but I don't believe it, you're kind of making a bit of a weird paradoxical statement.
Yeah. Like, I suppose I can understand why they put why they put both phrases in everyone, because in some combinations you have to put both, right? If you have beliefs but doesn't know, then of course you would have to say that it doesn't know, because to get the complete picture. And in some cases, if you say that I know, then there is everything that you need there, because of course that sort of entails that you believe it as well. So I sort of get why they make these two. But I think we managed to talk about this many times now. Yeah.
Be looking at here we have, and this is the truth, guys. Ladies and gentlemen, sorry, I should say more politically correct. Ladies and gentlemen, here's the truth. All of us are some combination of the two. This isn't a sliding scale where you go from atheist, agnostic, and believer. No, we're all some combination of two of those attributes. Let me show you a graph to help explain this. So here you have a theist, agnostic theist. This is a person who believes in God, which makes them a theist, but they claim to know, which is what makes them agnostic. So this person is a Gnostic theist. Remember, we're dealing with two different claims: one claim about belief and one claim about knowledge. These are two different questions. The question is, there are two questions that you ask that are asked.
No, because if you're claiming to know, that would entail a claim of belief.
Yeah.
Even if you're throwing in that claim in there. Because what is knowledge, right? There are so many different theories of knowledge, but they're all basically a rigorously justified form of belief. Knowledge is a subset of belief. So if you're saying you have knowledge, you will have a belief. Equally, it goes the other way. If you are saying you lack a belief, you're already saying you don't have knowledge.
Yeah. But Joe, are you saying that believing something means you know it?
Oh! Why do people always flip that one round? Like it's
I don't know.
It's like when people get like a syllogism completely confused. You know.
Yeah, but you see that very often, and I think that is part of the confusion that drives people towards these labels. Because then, if you say that you believe that God does not exist, and they say, "Oh, how do you know that?" or something, and I'm like, I'm not saying that I know that. I'm saying that I believe that to be true. Yeah. These are two different things.
Knowledge entails belief. Belief does not entail knowledge. It's that simple. The question of what knowledge is, that's obviously a bit more complicated, but I think that's probably far too complicated for this stream.
That are asked of all of us, which is, what do you believe to be true? And then what do you claim to know about those beliefs? Those are the two different questions. So they're two distinct questions. It's not one question. So you could be agnostic or Gnostic about any subject. I could be let's take the case of the flat earth or a round earth, whatever you happen to believe. I could be a Gnostic flat earther. That's someone who believes that the earth is flat, and claims to have knowledge of that belief is true. Or you could be an agnostic flat earther. So you could be a person who believes the earth.
You can't actually know the earth is flat, though. Because you can only know true things.
Yes, you can only know true things. Yes.
Yeah.
You can only have knowledge of true things, because if you're using the word know to mean something else, you can have information.
Yeah. I'm using it in the shorthand form here.
Yes, no, I know what you mean, but I'm clarifying for people that might not.
And I just posted in chat a link to sort of a video from Emerson Green that he made on the 4-quadrant graph, and I think it's excellent. So
it's brilliant.
It's a really, really good sort of breakdown with a lot of sort of nuance to it, and I think for everyone that wants to know more about it, they should check the video out.
I need to check that one out as well, actually, and I'll put it in our Atheism playlist.
Yeah, put it in the description of this as well, because who knows, Positively Atheist might come across this video and hopefully want to learn more.
Yeah, like he seems like a nice person, I have to say, from this video, right? He's not overly aggressive. I like his attitude, at least so far.
Yeah. You can imagine having a good conversation with him, definitely.
Yeah. Definitely.
Oh yeah, definitely. And to be fair, a lot of people who come out of theism go to YouTube and look into this stuff, and this is the stuff that they find and so adopt and defend. Which is hence why he's got all this information. He's defending this information.
Yeah, or disinformation.
Yeah.
Is flat, but does not claim to have certain knowledge of that. Doesn't have the claim to have any kind of evidence for it, right? That would make you an agnostic flat earther. And the same is true for the round earth. You could be an agnostic round earther. So this is a person who believes the earth is round, but doesn't claim any special knowledge about that claim. And the same is true with the round earth. You can be a Gnostic round earther. Once again, in similar fashion, this is a person who believes the earth is round, but claims to have certain knowledge that it's true. So if we look at all of that perspective, I think this graph will really help you wrap your head around what the actual terms mean and how they should be used. So we look here
Wrap
in
your
the
head
bottom
around the
right-hand
lamppost.
quadrant. We have agnostic theists. These are people who believe in God but do not claim to know. Now, this is a lot of people. This category, and more so as time is going on and science is expounding, you're having a lot of people push into this quadrant where they believe in some type of. I mean, a lot of people who are like they believe in some type of force, some type of energy, something like that, but they don't claim to have any special knowledge of this, right? You have people who are just kind of like spiritual people. They kind of believe like God is just this essence, and he kind of, they'll say terms like, I don't really have any evidence for this. I couldn't prove this to you. These are people who are agnostic theists. Okay. Then you have people in the top right-hand corner who are what we call Gnostic theists. These are people who not only believe in God, but they claim to know that there's a God. I was one of those people. I was a person who had not only had a belief in a God, but I also had what I thought was special knowledge that God existed. I could defend it with using Christian apologetics. I could show like what I thought was useful. One time I thought a guy was levitating off the ground. We were praying for him. One time I used to speak in tongues. These are evidentiary claims that proved to me that God was not only that proved to me that my belief was correct, right? So I was a Gnostic theist. Now let's look at the other sections here. Just like I gave an example of the flat Earth. We have the agnostic atheist in the bottom left-hand corner. These are people who they don't believe in God and they do not claim to know that for sure. Now that's where I happen to be right now in my life. I don't believe in any gods. I don't believe any gods exist, right? But at the same time, I'm not saying, and this is an important distinction, I'm not saying that gods don't exist. I'm not saying I know for sure. I'm not saying I have evidence of it. And once again, this does not make me just an agnostic. I am an agnostic atheist. Okay, it's a combination of those two.
No. I believe they don't exist. I'm not claiming knowledge. I'm not saying they definitely don't exist. Some of them, I'd say, as the way they're written, don't, but not all of them necessarily.
Yeah,
but,
I mean,
because
sorry, Philip.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I have come across atheists who hold to the philosophical definition, who claim to know that God doesn't exist. They will argue they know God doesn't exist. But most atheists who hold to that definition, they don't actually claim to know. And it's not defined as a claim of knowledge. It's just believing that negation of the proposition God exists.
Yeah. But you can see him do this, right? You can see him do this when he says, that at this moment in life, he's a sort of an agnostic atheist, but he's not saying that there are no gods. And then he goes immediately after, I don't claim to know that, right? But then you just made the point, right? That there is a distinction between these shoots that you're not seeing, right? Because if you want to be consistent in your entire graph, then you would have to create this other four-corner graph on the other side for people that actually believe that there are no gods, but then again distinguish between people who believe that there are no gods and sort of don't claim to know, and all of this. You can do the jumbo on the other side as well. So you could tell that this is not a complete graph because you just admitted as much almost yourself.
And then we have, of course, in the other corner, we have these people who are Gnostic atheists. These are people who do not believe in God, and they also claim to know that there are no gods. Right? These are what a lot of people refer to as hard atheism versus weak atheism, which is a term that's it's not accurate. We already have terms for these. We don't need to create all these additional terms. And once again, these are terms all this is designed to push the burden of proof onto the atheist where it doesn't belong. And here's why I say that, because you cannot disprove a negative. Especially with the negative you're trying to disprove.
Disprove a negative.
Oh my God, that with the negative.
Yeah.
Oh my God, that is the worst thing.
I'm sorry.
Let's go step by step, because I wanted to make first a comment where he said that this is what we call weak and strong atheist, and this is one of the problems that I have again with this sort of graph, because then you have people that say that weak atheists are people that don't believe God exists, right? But they don't believe that God doesn't exist. And that strong atheists are people who don't believe God exists and believe that gods don't exist, right? But this is not the same as agnostic and agnostic atheist at this point, because as you yourself just explained to us, Gnosticism and agnosticism, according to you, deal with knowledge. So they don't have anything to do with belief. So by your definition, these are not the same things. And it creates even more confusion, because I've seen this, right? They go, oh yeah, Gnostic atheist equals strong atheist, which is like, even if we go by your sort of schema, it wouldn't be the case. It wouldn't be the case. Yeah. So why create this entire giant confusion on this? And like, it's just, you'd have to have so many more layers if you want to really fill everything in. You just have sort of 4 quadrants that like miss most of what is there.
And then you get
like,
some people who confuse that strong atheist position with anti-theism as well.
Yeah, that's on top of that, right? On top of that. Then you have people, strong atheist equals agnostic atheist equals anti-theist or something like that. It's just, please stop. Stop
none
this
of
madness.
For something to be equal, it has to be identical. And they're not identical. At this point, what we need is like a choose your own adventure book with all the definitions.
Yeah. And then the thing with the, like, you can't prove a negative, which is like I wish people would stop saying, please stop saying this, because like we have entire sort of valid rules of inference in logic that are precisely based on this idea that you can prove a negative, right? This is the entire point. How do you prove a negative? How do you have a negation as a conclusion? You have sort of modus tollens or something like that, right?
Yeah.
You have a conditional, which like the antecedent entails the consequent, and then you deny the consequent, which denies the antecedent. That's the way to prove logically that the antecedent is false, right? Like, I don't get why people still say this. I can prove to you that the Earth is not a pyramid or something like that, right? And I don't understand why this is still a thing. I genuinely don't understand that.
There's no green dragon behind me right now.
Yeah.
Another one. If something's logically incoherent, square circle.
Yeah.
I was just about to say that one. And if you want to go for empirical evidence, I can prove there's no penguin on his shoulder right now.
Yeah.
Because it's right there in front of us.
And then people will say something like, I've seen this happen, right? And they say, oh yeah, but in order to do that, you have to prove a positive first, right?
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, what does that have to do with anything? It's still proving a negative. But if you prove a conditional and like an affirmation or a negation, then you have proven a negative.
How would you do that for the penguin on the shoulder? Would you go, there's his shoulders, you can see them. Here's a penguin. This penguin is not on his shoulder. There you go. Is that how you prove the positive first in that paradigm?
Yeah, you just have to prove something that you would expect to find if the hypothesis was correct. You have to show that is wrong. That is all that you have to do. And you don't, like, even I had examples with this, with people saying, in order to prove that the Earth is not flat, you have to prove that the Earth is round, which is not true. You just have to make an observation that is incompatible with the Earth being flat. That is all that you have to do. You don't have to care if the Earth is rad or a pyramid or whatever else, right? You don't have to define a shape first for the Earth. You just have to make an observation that is incompatible with one of the sort of things that you're proposing to prove that to not be the case. So like, even this is false. So
Well, I've also heard it. Once you give them sort of certain examples, they'll go to, well, you can't prove a universal metaphysical claim. But again, square circle.
Yeah.
That's a universal claim. I mean, that's an all possible worlds claim.
Yeah.
And then they go on to redefining it, don't they? They go, well, yeah, it could just be, they could just use the word square for circle.
Yeah, but
that's just...
like, you just argue that, you haven't proven a negative. You've just renamed a certain thing. Now if you're defining a circle as a square, you're defining a square as a circle, well, then you still can't prove a square circle.
Exactly.
Or a circle square.
One I heard was that guy that Steve was having a chat with. Was it John Richards or something? That was talking about the square circle, and his one was, have you seen that image where they shine the light at the square from different angles, and you get a shadow of a circle that way and a shadow of a square that way? It's like, it's still not a square circle.
I've heard that one.
Perception.
It's like you say, it's still not proving a square circle. It's just proving that light shines in a particular way.
Yeah. Or there's the moving the goalposts. Well, the penguin's invisible.
Then it's not a penguin.
Yeah. But then, like, I would almost claim that it is easier to prove something false than to prove something correct in a sense. Because, you know, like many times, even in science, you could observe this, right? You can have a hypothesis that you have, like, this thing supports it, this thing supports it, this thing supports it, but you never can sort of guarantee that is evidence, if you want to talk about evidence for that hypothesis. But the easiest way is to find something, you know, that falsifies the hypothesis, right? Something that you would sort of expect to see that is wrong. And that has to be, if the hypothesis is correct, then you have to see this thing, but you don't see this thing, and therefore the hypothesis is false. That's the easy way. That's a very easy way to prove something false, a negative, if you will.
Proof is magical in essence, because as soon as you interject magic or you interject miracles, then all arguments for reason and rationale go right out the window. Because guess what? And I'll give you an example. And what I mean by this, the reason why atheism carries with it no burden of proof is because it's always the person who makes the positive assertion that something is true that is required.
Okay. I covered off the burden of proof earlier, didn't I? I mean, he's not wrong that if someone is making a positive claim that something definitely is true, you know, it's not talking about someone that necessarily believes it's true, that this definitely is true. Yes, there is a burden of proof there, but he's wrong by saying atheism carries no burden of proof. And I explained why earlier, so I'm not going to say.
To provide the evidence for that. The atheist, it's not an atheist's job to prove that there are no gods. That's in my opinion, that's an impossible thing to do. And here, let me give an example of why this is the case. Let's say, like, I had superpowers and I could be at all places at all times. I was omnipresent. Would that be and let's say I searched all of known reality, past, present, and future, in all corners of in all spaces, in all places, and I was able to look simultaneously at everything with my own eyes, searching for quote unquote a God. Would that be enough to disprove that there's no God? And when I say that, I also mean all philosophies, all argumentations too. I'm not only omniscient, I'm omnipresent, but I'm also omniscient, knowing all details of all facts. Let's say I was able to examine all of that.
Yeah.
Would that?
Yeah. If you're omniscient and you know all facts, then it is possible to know whether God exists or not, because God's existence is a fact.
Yeah. So, like, is he saying that even then it wouldn't be possible?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Because God could hide himself from you, but then you would know the fact.
Yeah, you would know that fact as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. Theory me.
That'd be enough to disprove a God. The answer is no, because by definition, God is supernatural or magical. So,
no. Even if he is supernatural or magical, if you had knowledge of everything, come on, dude.
You know that.
Come on,
you know it. Yeah.
Like, seriously.
Like, at that point, you could say that this disproves that God is like omnipotent in a sense, because, you know, there's one thing that he cannot do. He cannot hide from you because you're omniscient. But this sort of game, like, is something that theists actually use sometimes to say that, you know, there has to be just one God. Right? Because they play with this sort of game, you know, that if you have two entities and they're both all powerful, you know, then, you know, you cannot have two entities that are all powerful, because then one would be able to do something like kill the other entity or something like that, which the other one wouldn't be able to do. So there has to be just one, right? That is one of the ways that you can sort of reduce the number of gods in sort of theistic argumentation.
The rules of reason
go ahead.
Break down, right? He could make himself unknowable to everybody, or just make himself unknowable to me. So I would be able to. I would say, look, I've traveled everywhere. I've looked at all possible aspects of reality itself, both material and immaterial, meaning the actual information that's available. And I found no evidence of God. And you would just say, aha, he was somewhere and he just didn't want to make himself known to you. This is why
I don't know about the rules of reason and rationality breaking down in the supernatural level, but I do know that his rules of reasoning and rationality appear to have broken down in this argument.
Yeah, and then, like, again, it's like I could see where he's going with this if he was saying that sort of theism is completely unfalsifiable in the sense that it makes no sort of thing no prediction in the sense, no expectations, creates nothing. But of course, that is false, right? Because like there are many arguments for atheism that exploit this very thing. For example, theism is supposed to predict that, that it's all loving, which has certain consequences, and this is what is exploited by sort of the problem of evil, which, by the way, can be formulated as a logical argument, which, by the way, concludes that God doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Right? So there are many arguments that you can formulate with the conclusion, therefore, God doesn't exist. You can make them. You can. That's basically what philosophers in atheism have been doing for a long while now.
Yeah.
Guy needs some moppy.
The court of law, for
Parmenides.
instance, defendants are not required to prove their innocence, right? Because it's something that you cannot prove your innocence, right? Or at least it's very difficult to prove your innocence, near impossible. That's why
no.
If you show a plane ticket that somebody was halfway around the world, I'm pretty sure that's pretty good evidence that they're innocent.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, if I'm doing a stream right now and a crime is going on, and for some reason my fingerprints are on that weapon, I think it's fairly safe to say that I can prove that I'm innocent. Why? Because I'm doing a live stream with you guys right now, and there's people in the chat room interacting with us. So yes, I can prove my innocence if something was to happen right now. Yes.
This is even worse than the normal courtroom analogy, because there is another thing to be said here about the courtroom analogy, which is the fact that there is artificial bias in the way we look at sort of in the courtroom to have a bias set up so that it favors people not going to we favor innocence essentially over guilt, right? We consider it worse if someone that is innocent goes to prison than if someone that is guilty walks free. That is why we presume innocence in the first place. That is an artificial boundary that was set up in order to have this system, right, which we deem better than the opposite. So that is why this whole thing exists. It's not like a rule for every proposition ever.
Most fair and reasonable judicial systems, it is the prosecution's job to prove the guilt, right? It's their job to show with different levels of certainty that the person is guilty of the crime that they are being accused of. It's technically speaking, the defendant can just go into court and just sit down and not say anything, because it's not their job to prove their innocence. And in fact, if you look at how fair and reasonable court systems work,
if you have a ticket from the person that you're defending that is from across the world, and you're not showing it because you're just waving your hands and no, I'm here just to hear what the people are accusing
not
me.
On me.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Then you should fire that lawyer.
Yeah.
You should fire that lawyer, because of course, if you have proof that you are innocent, you should present it. I know that this is probably uncharitable at some level, because I'm pretty sure that he wouldn't say this, but it seems from what he's saying.
It's what his view sort of entails.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The other thing as well is, in a courtroom, the defendant's lawyer is trying to prove him innocent. Not guilty, but he is trying to prove him innocent.
Yeah.
Jurors don't declare the defendant innocent or guilty. That's not their options. They have two options, which is the defendant is either found guilty or they're found not guilty. It's because the burden of proof is on the person making the positive assertion or the claim. And this is why theists want to put atheists. They want to shift the burden of proof onto the atheists, because it makes them feel better about their position. They recognize they don't have the evidence for it. They recognize they can't make a case for it. They recognize that it doesn't seem to make logical sense in reality. So instead of facing that fact and accepting that and just admitting, hey, look, I don't have the evidence for this. I know it sounds silly. I just believe it anyways. They want to shift the burden of proof and put it on the atheist and say, aha, if you can't prove God doesn't exist, then you're being irrational. Or you could take this out and just say you're.
There's entire books called Case for God.
Yeah.
Arguing for God. I mean, isn't that what Gödel's theorem is?
Yeah, I'm constantly amazed by how some atheists think that theists are just content sitting there and not having any reason to believe, and yet they do believe.
Yeah.
I don't get why people think that. I don't understand why people think that this is something that most theists would be content with.
Yeah, I don't actually know any that at least don't have an argument for why they're reasonable to believe in God. Even if it's just, well, the Bible seems to resonate with me.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's always some form of reason there. And I think generally with the people that we tend to talk on, they're very, very, very well reasoned in their position, their belief. More well reasoned than the atheists that we talk to. And I hate that, because we're atheists ourselves, and we're actually going, well, these theists are far more rational than you guys seem. Like, we want you guys, the other atheists, to be coming across as rational and reasonable, because, if you're going to be tribalistic about it, you're technically our side. I mean, we don't like seeing things that way. We like to have conversations with everyone. We don't like to put it into us versus them. That's not what we're doing. But realistically, we hold the belief gods don't exist. So people put us in that tribe anyway, and they assume that we're like, well, a lot of the internet atheists are. And I mean, not necessarily this guy. I don't know enough about him to say whether he's like that or not. He's making few bad arguments, but he might not be that typical heuristic, dogmatic, fire and brimstone, meme dropping, prove it, pigeon chess playing guy. I hope he's not. But that's the sort of atheist that people think when they hear an atheist online, and I don't like being associated with that.
Agnostic, which says, oh, hey, it could be there, it could not be there, right? So this is why the burden of proof is getting shifted. So I gave a couple of examples of how the burden of proof works and why it's important for this. And the reason why this is so important is because these usage of words and this misusage of words is really distracting from the conversation. Atheists don't believe what you believe, not because they necessarily have evidence that you're wrong, that they could prove to you you're wrong. They just don't believe it because there's no evidence for these claims. And one of the problems is that there may never be any way to have evidence for these claims. A lot of times atheists will say, well, what would convince you? What evidence would work? And the only honest answer is to say, well, I really don't know, but if there were a God, he would know. He would know what it takes to convince me. And because he hasn't yet done that, there's only one of two possible options. Either A, he doesn't exist, or B, he doesn't want to convince me. In either case,
he accidentally hits the problem. Yeah, the divine hiddenness.
Divine hiddenness, exactly. He accidentally made the argument from divine hiddenness there, and he actually said, either he doesn't exist, or he made some other things there, which is the point that I was making earlier in a way.
Yeah, and that point also only works out with sort of the omni-style God, because I mean, if it was say like the Greek gods or something like that, they're not like the all-powerful, all-knowing style gods. So that what he's saying there is only really working for that kind of God.
Sorry,
I was just going to say, and I do agree with what he's saying there. That's what I was going to say.
It's a counter for any God who is defined as wanting a personal relationship with those that he has created and wants them to know he exists.
So.
Yeah.
Which is a lot of gods, to be fair, especially gods tied to religion.
Yeah.
It's not really my fault. But the theist hears that, and it's very intimidating because they want to be able to put the blame on you. They want to be able to put the burden of evidence on you and make you feel irrational for not believing their claims. When in reality, you're just saying, look, I don't believe you. I don't believe these claims, right? And this is a perfect irrational position to have. In fact, this is the default position for all beliefs. There are probably billions upon billions of things that other people believe that you don't believe right now. Many things, most of those you may never have heard of, and you may never hear of the rest of your life. You may die one day and never heard of 99.9% of the beliefs on this planet, right? But
yeah,
makes you
I think in this case, he's sort of making a reasonable point, but in a sort of unreasonable way. If you're going to tell somebody you don't believe them, you should have at least some rational reason to not believe them in order to be holding a rational non-belief, for want of a better word.
Yeah.
But with regards to all the propositions that you've never heard, it's not just that you don't believe them. It's similar to how Oppie describes it, in that you're innocent of those propositions.
Mhm.
You might not have the mental state, but that's not the same as not believing it.
You're completely absent of a mental state
Yeah.
in regards to it.
Yeah.
And that's the big difference as well. That I get in so many conversations with people go, well, what's the difference between not believing and lacking belief? And you're like, right, well, it depends what you mean by lacking belief. If you're using lacking belief to mean I don't believe this, then of course there isn't any difference really. But if you're using it to mean an absence of belief, it means you've got no mental state in regards to this thing, which is impossible, because as soon as you've heard it, your mind starts working and starts thinking about these things. And you start forming ideas, and then you might have an instant gut reaction of, oh yeah, that sounds right. Oh no, it doesn't sound right. But then you might start building justifications for it.
Yeah. And again, if you come into contact with some proposition, then I would argue that the most reasonable position that you should take is probably agnosticism. Like, apart from any sort of consideration. If you don't make any considerations on the things, then you should be agnostic on the proposition. And to be fair, like, he's using atheism in a way that would be sort of similar to agnosticism, right? So in a sense, he's saying sort of the same thing, and I would agree with him, and I would agree with you as well on the innocent point, right? Because there is this sort of consideration there. But it's just something to keep in mind, right? It is helpful to say that you don't believe either way. You don't believe it is true, and you don't believe it that is false, because many people just say, oh, I don't believe it is true. But that, like, I understand why people then get angry at that, because you're leaving half of the conversation away. Like, it feels weird. It feels like you're not telling the entire story. Why not tell them? Why not tell them? If you're really in that position, why not tell them that you don't believe either way? It seems like you're almost suggesting that it is more reasonable to just say that it doesn't exist or something like that, because otherwise why would you, like, you should have the same attitude towards the proposition that God doesn't exist as the proposition that God does exist. You should have the same sort of attitude towards it, but that's not what we see from most atheists. For most atheists, it's just this is done, this is fairy tales, this is blah 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 blah. But they never say anything, for the other half of the thing. So why not just try to justify that? And it's very easy to do, and you can make just an argument just about sort of prior probability as well. Like Draper has a paper on this where he argues that sort of the prior probability of atheism is much higher than that of theism. And that is an argument that he's making, though, right? He's making an argument that justifies the prior probability. So in that case, if you don't have any sort of external evidence that shifts this, he would say that you should believe that atheism is true because of the prior probability that is higher. But that is still an argument, right? You're still making an argument. So why not make at least that argument?
And like you said, he's already making the argument from divine hiddenness.
Yeah, again, right? He has that justification.
Well, yeah, but your philosophy is useless, man.
Well, I think one of the things is because they sort of, a lot of atheists will argue, you need empirical, testable, predictable evidence to prove God exists. They think an argument like that isn't enough to warrant not believing God doesn't exist, because it's not got empirical, testable, repeatable evidence. But that's not needed.
Yeah, that's not needed. And then I think that most people then say, oh, but that's not enough to prove definitely 100% with million certainty that it is false. But that is also not needed, right? That is also not needed.
You just need the rational justification.
Exactly.
Agnostic, it makes you a non-believer. You don't believe in it. You either believe a proposition is true or you don't. It's like an on and off switch. Now, when it comes to knowledge, you have like a scale of when it comes to knowledge, whether or not you're Gnostic or agnostic, it's like a floating scale, because let's be honest here, what do we really know is real? I mean, as far as we can tell, everything around us could be fake. This could all be a simulation. So we really don't have the exact.
As G.E. Moore put it, there's my hand. If you're skeptical that you're not real, just hold up your hand.
I mean, do you think? Surely, therefore, you are.
Yeah. I mean, I've heard T-Jump argue that he's not sure he exists. He can't be sure he exists. I think that's kind of probably an uncharitable reading for what he was trying to say. But I have heard him say it's possible that he doesn't exist.
Yeah, that's weird. Like, I get, like, depending on how you read it, it might be reasonable. But like, there's definitely at least one interpretation that is unreasonable there.
Yeah, I mean, he might be arguing that it's possible that he's in a simulation or a brain in a vat, and therefore he doesn't exist. But
yeah, but he still has an experience, right? And if that you take as the existence thing, then you cannot. It's hard to deny that.
Yeah.
And then another thing that I wanted to point out was the switch that he just said. Yeah, that's correct, right? As any proposition, right? Something can be true or false.
Yeah.
So think like God exists as a proposition, therefore God exists can be true or false. Now, why are you completely ignoring, the one half of the proposition? Like, it's just like you cut it off and then you just talk about sort of the attitude towards one half of the switch. Like, that doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, he describes belief solely in the kind of binariness of a mental state rather than
which is true, attitude. Right? Like that is a true dichotomy. But then you can say, right, there is another true dichotomy, which is also
the other end.
Yeah, which is the other end, like with the negation. And then you get sort of like the permutations that Joe was mentioning before, and then you exclude one because it is a contradiction. And so you have three remaining. Oh, who would think that there would be three remaining?
Yeah.
I mean, the basics of propositional logic are really easy. I mean, we discussed it earlier, and it's like people know these words like proposition and true, false, but then that seems to be as far as the knowledge goes, and they don't really think about how do you actually apply it. I mean, you don't need all the complex sides of logic, really. You only really need the basis of an idea for discussing a proposition. And how to do it. And as you said, he's only answering whether he believes a proposition is true or not. Okay, well, what about if you believe the proposition is false or not? As we've said, all three of us, in different and similar ways, you're not fully answering the proposition.
Yeah, and it's like, I think, like, if you imagine a dark, I suppose a dark room is not the right way to look at this, because then, but like, say you have a switch that turns on sort of a device in your room, right? And you're in a dark room, so you don't know really what the switch, in which position the switch is, but you know that it is either on or off for that device, right? It cannot be.
Yeah.
So it's binary, right? It's either the device is on or it's off. Then you can believe that it is on or not believe that it is on, and you can believe that it is off or not believe that it is off, right? That is another thing that you can have. And so why would you exclude? Like, it's like you just want to talk about people who believe that it is on, and like, it doesn't make sense to me. Like, because there is, like, pretty obviously this other side of the conversation that just screams at you, please talk about me as well. Why would you ignore that?
And there's like literature going back hundreds and hundreds of years discussing the other side.
Yeah, as well, yeah.
I mean, where's it gone? This is just from the article, You Won't Believe This, which is a basic way of thinking about propositional logic. So you've got your proposition, which is true or false, and the four belief positions. In regards to it being true, and in regards to it being false, you do believe it's true, you don't believe it's false. You don't believe it's true, and you do believe it's false. You don't believe either way, and then you believe both of them, which is why we exclude D, and A, B, C from there are our three positions. We have belief, we have disbelief, we have suspense of judgment. They are our three epistemic or cognitive attitudes in regards to the proposition.
You forgot D, the mushroom one.
The mushroom one?
The magic mushroom stance.
Oh, right, yes. I think I describe it as the streaker stance, actually.
Yeah.
But and this is how I was talking about it as well. I threw in a little bit of logical notation at the end, and we've got the identifiers here of theist, agnostic, atheist, innocent, and there's no identifier for someone with contradictory beliefs.
Irrational.
Yeah, and I put it as positions on the field. I've done this in different ways. Oh, there you go. Rational belief. Let's just quickly go through this one then. Belief, disbelief, and suspension of judgment. There are 3 cognitive or epistemic attitudes one can take towards a proposition. These are the following. Belief. If you conclude that a proposition is true, then the appropriate attitude towards that proposition is belief. Disbelief. If you conclude that a proposition is false, then the appropriate attitude towards that proposition is disbelief. Suspense of judgment. If you are unable to reach a conclusion concerning the truth value of P, then the appropriate attitude towards P is the suspension of judgment. Note, belief and disbelief come in degrees. You may be certain that P is true, or you may only be highly confident that P is true. These are both varieties of believing that P is true. I mean, this was actually from a Philosophy 101 course, actually, that I found as a PDF on the internet. I think I've actually still got on my phone somewhere. It was given away for free. I think it was by Routledge University or something like that, but it was just a selection of like 15-20 slides or something like that on just basic stuff to do with philosophy, and that was belief and stuff like that was part of it. There you go.
Answers for all those things. So the truth is, all knowledge is tentative anyways. We're all kind of just flowing back and forth. And if you're being quite honest, all of us are really agnostic about it.
All knowledge is tentative. What does he mean by that?
Sounds like a sort of fallibilism type position.
Right. I mean, that's fair. I can take a fallibilistic approach to knowledge. I can understand that. I think, combine it maybe with a bit of coherence theory, bit of JTB, I guess, as well. But yeah, fair. Okay, I'm glad I asked that because I wasn't quite sure what he was going, and I was wondering if he was going to say if he was using it to say it's all subjective.
No, I think what he's getting at is that we hold something as knowledge, but at some point in the future, something may come up to show that we don't actually know it.
Well, it shows that it can't be knowledge unless it's true.
Yeah, but that's why it stops as knowledge. We might have things that we think show it to be true, and then we get introduced to information that shows it to be false.
Mm-hmm.
And that's my reading on it, giving it the most charitable reading I can.
That's why we have you here.
I thought it was for my great looks.
With the exception of a few axiomatic beliefs like the law of non-contradiction or these kind of axiomatic positions. So outside of that, let's be honest here, we're pretty much all agnostic. So this is why when someone says, hey, I'm agnostic when it comes, like so we ask them what they believe about God, they're agnostic. This is why this doesn't really answer the question. You really need to say whether and you really need to come to the actual acceptance of the position, acceptance of what you actually believe. And so what I tell people is say, look, how do you know if you're agnostic or agnostic? Well, ask yourself, start off with whatever the proposition is being put to you. So whether it's how many jelly beans are in the jar, somebody tells you, hey, there's 157 jelly beans in the jar, or whether it's saying, hey, look, whatever it is. So let's take the jelly bean example. Somebody says, hey, there's 157 jelly beans in the jar. Say, okay, I don't believe that's true, but I'm not, here's the important part. I'm not saying it's false. I'm just saying I don't believe.
See, he's giving both sides of the proposition there.
Yeah. That's the first time he's done it.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you don't want to say that it's false, that's fine, right? I think you would have good justification to think that it is false, right? Because of the things that we said before about sort of
got a 1 in 400 chance being right.
But I mean, it's fine if you want to be agnostic about that. then it's fine.
Yeah.
Right? So that would make you a disbeliever in the theory that the claim that 100.
No. No.
I mean,
Yeah, I think.
Sorry, Philip.
No, yeah, you were saying the same thing. So go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, there is the colloquial usage of disbelief, which is simply not believing rather than believing not.
That's fair. I'm just going by. I mean, he's talking about a proposition, and so if you're talking
Yeah, but
about
that doesn't. I mean, he called the question of how many gumballs are in the jar a proposition when it's not actually a proposition; it's a question.
Yeah, it wasn't until he said there are 156 gumballs in the jar or whatever number it was, and that was the proposition.
So to give like a charitable reading, I'm guessing he's using disbelief in a colloquial sense in the same way that he has been everything else. Just to be fair.
Damn, like vague colloquial language rather than clear, concise terminology. It's almost like if he was using these terms in, better ways, we'd have a better understanding of what he was going on about, and you'd actually have that clear cut between theist, agnostic, and atheist.
Yeah.
57 jelly beans in the jar. It doesn't mean you're saying they're wrong. It doesn't mean you're saying they're right. And it doesn't mean you're saying there's even a potential for them they're right or wrong. It's just saying, I don't believe at this point there are 157 beans jelly bar. And now, then we look at the knowledge claim. Now you come up with a level of, so whether you're Gnostic or agnostic about a certain number, let's be honest here, you're agnostic about how many jelly beans in the jar, because you really don't know. If it's a scale, it's not. And what I love about this this graph here is it shows that it's not just like a straight, like you either believe or you don't. You either you're agnostic or agnostic. This is a sliding scale. You kind of ebb and flow through this depending on what the claim is you're being talked about. Like I said, the word atheist can be simply replaced with flat earther or round earther. You can be I'm gonna put this over here real quick. You can be this can be for any topic. You can be agnostic, flat earther. Okay, and remember, based upon that, what does that mean? It means that you are a person. If you're agnostic flat earther, it means you.
Just want to say one thing.
You believe the Earth is flat.
Yeah. He says round earther and flat earther, but both these positions are actually not lack of belief positions, which is sort of undermining the entire thing that he's been saying so far. Right? Because round earther would be someone who believes that the Earth is round, and flat earther who believes that the Earth is flat. So it's not just that one believes that it is round and the other one is lacking a belief that it is round or something like that. As that is why are you not willing to do the same thing for the atheist conversation that you just did for the Earth conversation? I don't understand that, but okay.
I don't. But I tend to think a lot like Ozzy did that time, where he says it's basically just a way to avoid having the discussion.
Hiding the ball.
I genuinely believe that people come to this from a good place, right? I genuinely believe that they just feel like they don't want to claim stuff, right? They don't want to say stuff. They just want to be left in peace in a way. And so they're going to say, they feel like they're modest in saying that they don't know things, that they just lack a belief, right? I can understand why people say that this is rational and stuff like that, but it becomes a problem when it then starts to become this sort of activism thing where you then go on to people for saying other things and you're just showing that you don't understand that, especially be honest with yourself. Do you believe that God does not exist? I think if you're really honest about it, you do believe that God does not exist. Right? At least most people, because they then go and say, it's like fairy tales and the pink unicorn or something. That just shows, right? You believe that the pink unicorn doesn't exist. So why are you making these comparisons if you just lack a belief or stuff like that? It's
And I've had discussions with people where they, when you actually get down to the discussion with them, they will say, yes, I do actually believe God does not exist. I would just never actually claim something like that because that puts the burden of proof on me.
Yeah, but that is sort of the problem in a way.
Yeah, exactly.
You're demanding something of some other person that is merely expressing that he believes this, that you yourself would not want to have.
Yeah.
Right. So, if you're not willing to do the same things, then it's sort of weird, right? Because a lot of religious people are not there going to just say that they believe in God in order to, I don't know, make you feel bad or something. They're just expressing their belief. So why would But why would it be a problem? I don't understand.
But you don't claim certain knowledge about that belief. Okay, or you can be a Gnostic round earther, and this is a person who believes the Earth is round and claims to have certain knowledge. So you can see, based upon all this, that the word agnostic can be used for anything. It's not dealing just with religious statements, and that's why using this phrase agnostic to define your position on God is not a useful term. All this is talking about is your claim to certain knowledge. That's it. The question is still going to be, what is your belief? And this is such an important distinction.
Which, if you use the other term, the other definition of agnostic, that's what he would be expressing, is his belief.
Yeah.
And if people will start rethinking how they're using these terms, it will really help the conversations we're trying to have, which is, hey, what do you believe and why do you believe it? And hopefully you found this video enlightening. Hopefully you found it helpful to explain the difference between agnosticism and Gnosticism and theism, atheism. Hopefully you found this chart helpful. If I'm put a link to this actual chart, so you'll have that, so you can see it, you can share with your friends, and hopefully it will help you have better conversations in the future moving forward. And for you atheists out there, stop trying to obfuscate this. You know, a lot of people, for me, I had a hard, and here's the real reality is about this. Atheism.
Can I just, sorry.
I wanted
to slow it back down.
Yeah.
Comes with a lot of bad connotations. Let's just be frank about this. The word atheism has been run through the mud. I was taught my whole life growing up in church that atheists were bad people. They were can't be trusted. I just saw a study the other day that atheists are the least trusted people group on the planet, and even less trustworthy than jihadists by many people. Okay, so and for what? Because we don't believe that there's a God, right? This is the narrative that's been pushed to all of us to try to make atheism look silly and ridiculous, when in fact atheism is the default position and it's the only reasonable position. And I'm sorry if that hurts your feelings, but it is. There is no evidence of gods or gods existing, right? There's no evidence of this, and there may never be any evidence of it. So atheism is the default, the most reasonable position. Now you can tell me, hey, look, I accept that there's no evidence of God, but I believe it just based on faith, right? Regardless, and that's fine if that's what you believe. But don't come to me then and say, "Well, you must believe it too," right? Because you haven't made the case that's reasonable to believe it yet. So this is the real problem. This is the real problem. Atheism is not a bad word. You don't have to be ashamed of it. You don't have to be embarrassed to be an atheist. All an atheist is someone who just doesn't believe. Babies are all atheists. Okay? Technically speaking, any organisms that have conscious thought that don't have any belief statement on God. Now I'm kind of interjecting kind of assumptions here. I'm assuming most other animals are atheists. They could be possible they have some type of belief in some type of supernatural being. We just don't understand how they relate that to or how they think about it. But as far as we can tell, all animals.
The Quran does argue that all things created by God have a kind of tendency to believe in him and kind of prostrate to him, prostrate to him. So his argument kind of goes against what a lot of the Muslims might argue.
Yeah, that's fair. I think they've observed. I can't remember what apes it was starting to develop ritualistic behaviors. I didn't necessarily mean that they believed in a god; that they just started having these ritualistic things. And I think is it in the Bible as well, where they're talking about how rocks are actually theists. Even the rocks believe in gods or something. I can't remember what it was. Don't quote me on that.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
I'm trying. I might be misremembering. It's been a long time since I've picked up a Bible, I must admit.
I mean, one thing I will say here is what he says at the end. He's not entirely wrong. Forget the babies are atheist part. That's wrong. But he's not wrong when he says that atheists are mistrusted, have a bad rep, and all that kind of stuff. It's not quite like that in Europe. But in America, where he is, there is a lot of that goes on. So I can understand him wanting to create a sort of positive light about atheism. And I could sort of get behind that.
Yeah, me as well. And I agree actually with a lot of what he had to say here about exactly this sort of empathetic way. But there's two things that I wanted to say. First of all, like he said, we should just, ask, what people believe and why. And I think actually that's a pretty good suggestion, right? Because that gets around a lot of the issues with definitions here. Because, if a theist, do you believe in God? Yes, the theist will say yes. If you ask an atheist, what do you believe, with regards to this proposition? Then you sort of force them to sort of, I don't believe that it is false, I don't believe that it is true, something like that. But you get around these labels, I mean, right? And if you have an atheist that says, I believe that God does not exist, then he will express that. Of course, there are some issues probably here with burden of proof, because, if you converse with someone, you still have to provide reasons, as many of you said, that it is, that whatever they are saying, the reason is not a good reason, or why do you think it's not a good reason, and all of that. So you still have some sort of justification there. And another thing that I wanted to say, I think I forgot what I was to say, so maybe we should move on for a second.
All right, I'll play it, see if it comes to you. We've only got like 30 seconds left of his video.
30 seconds.
Well, all other animals are atheists, right? As far as we can tell, all babies are atheists. Atheism is not a bad word. You're not a bad person if you're an atheist. You're just literally a person who doesn't believe in God's currently. And I hope it was enlightening. If it was, please like and subscribe. If it wasn't, please like and subscribe. I'd love to get your feedback and comments in the comment section. And until next time, keep it positively atheist out there in YouTube land. Thanks.
Okay, I think I just got what I wanted to say here. Right? There's this mantra in the atheist community a bit that is like normalize atheism. Right?
Yeah.
And he says the same thing. And what I'm saying is, please, like, if you want to normalize atheism, you should want to normalize people who believe that there are no gods as well. Because what you're doing here is creating sort of like, look, this is reasonable, but you're sort of implying that the people who believe that there are no gods are not the reasonable ones. Because you're like, look, I get why you're saying that of those people, but we're not saying that. Look, we are just this, and this is reasonable. If you want to normalize atheism, you should normalize the belief that that proposition is false. That is what you should be doing, because that helps you as well. Because, of course, if that proposition is normalized, then your sort of suspension of judgment, in a way, is normalized as well. But you should go all the way, not sort of throw these other people out into the thing. Oh, yeah, these actually... Like, I know that this is not what he was saying directly, but it seemed to be implied here, right? Because he seemed to be sort of making this excuse that, oh, no, but we're not saying that, right? We're just sort of lacking a belief or not having a belief, which, like... I don't get, like, if you want to normalize atheism, normalize the idea that people are reasonable in believing that there are no gods. That's my opinion on how you should normalize atheism.
Completely agree.
Right, I'm going to quickly switch it back and get rid of the screen share. We will be back in literally like 20, 30 seconds. Oh, even less. Look at that. I've got a lot of chat to catch up on.
Yeah.
Hello, Lucid Crow, Ansfrida, Chesh, Manny, Cafe, and everyone else who's come in. Tree Feline, Bearded Heretic, you came back. Hope you're cool, dude. And everyone else. Sorry if I missed you. There's a hell of a lot to go through in this chat. If any of you...
Tired, Twisted Hippie.
Yes, yeah, I said hello to them earlier. If any of you have any questions or any comments, can you get them in now? And then we'll read them out, because there's so many messages that have gone by whilst we were reviewing that video. I think there's probably a bit too much for me to catch up on. Yeah.
And I think we deserve a pat on our backs, because we managed to do a 90-minute video in 2.5 hours. And it took us 2 hours to do 5 minutes. Get better at this.
Yeah.
Were we really going for 2.5 hours? Oh, blimey. Sorry, everyone. So, you thought the atheist experience were about negative atheism. I don't know if they are necessarily all about it, but they do support the whole negative positive atheism, except they call it implicit and explicit atheism, which is why they would say, and I think Matt Dillahunty actually backed up rocks being atheist, because rocks are implicit atheists because they don't have that belief.
Yeah, I've also heard Matt Dillahunty say that atheism is just a lack of belief. There are atheists who believe gods don't exist, but that's not what atheism is.
Yeah, at least he acknowledges that.
Yeah. And that's one thing I want to say about Positively Atheist. He acknowledged a few times that there are atheists that believe gods don't exist.
Which, by the way, Positively Atheist is a
it's
bit...
kind of ironic.
Yeah. Positively atheist is a lactheist. Or a lack of belief.
Not positively an atheist.
Cafe says positive atheism is the political and dogmatic type of atheism promoted by the ACA. No, it's not. Lacktheism, as in negative atheism, is the political and dogmatic type of atheism that is promoted by the ACA.
He's also not wrong, because the term has been co-opted by certain groups where it means positive atheism means showing the positive side of atheism.
Right, okay. So
like co-opting terms.
Yeah, so let's go back to just actually having, the clear, concise ontological positions, please.
Yeah. And don't throw people that believe that there are no gods under the bus, please. You're going to show the positive side of atheism, because that's actually, there are a lot of people that actually do good work in that camp.
So we got a question or statement from LB saying, I feel lactheists are trying very hard to avoid it. It's not funny anymore, as people in these parts of YouTube are growing more philosophy savvy and they are dying off. I missed the first part of the statement. I don't know where that is. I assume you're trying to avoid what? Are you talking about the burden of proof?
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, I think so, judging by the content.
The
comment.
But yes, you're right. There is a lot of hiding the ball. There is a lot of trying to, avoid the burden of proof. I mean, in that video, there was the constant claim that atheists have no burden of proof, but that's a misunderstanding of what the burden of proof is. It's not necessary to prove the position absolutely true. It's to justify it as rational. Unless you're saying this is definitely the case, it's a different circumstance.
And I just want to say, a lot of them hyper-focus on this burden of proof. And I want to go back to something Philip said, where if you take away the labels, you could just have the conversation. You could give your position, have a conversation about what you believe about, the actual claim God exists.
Yeah.
And that would go much further than just hyper-focusing on who has the burden of proof.
Yeah.
And as you said, and why? What do you believe and why?
Yeah.
That's your answer to the proposition and your justification for your answer. And what's the justification? That's you fulfilling the burden of proof, or at least trying to.
I think people should imagine, sort of like, even if you don't believe either way, if you're agnostic, then imagine a friend asking you, well, why don't you believe either way? Right? If a friend, someone that you like to interact with, right, would ask you that question, how would you answer? Because presumably what I imagine, it would not be, oh no, you have to show what you believe because I don't want to, I don't believe either way. Presumably you would want to give him a reason. You would say something like, oh, I've heard these arguments, and like, I don't think this works because of this and this and that, or just, I don't think that these arguments work for theism, but also, it seems like these arguments for atheism don't work or something like that. But you would say that. And if this friend wanted to go into more detail, you would presumably go with him into this more detail, right? If he asked you to go into more detail. But like, this whole thing is nonsense about, oh, someone asks you, oh no, you have to say what you believe, and then I just take this position of neutrality automatically and just question you until you give up or something like that. That is just cheap, in my opinion, in a way.
And it's not a positive way to promote atheism. It paints you in a negative light.
Yeah,
And Frida says the negative was after Flew defining it as lack of belief theism. Actually, that isn't exactly how Flew defined it. So Flew, in his paper in 72, we actually did a stream on it. He was trying to say, instead of it being the belief gods do not exist, we should, take he split it into the positive and negative atheism, and the negative atheism was not believing, but it was also a method that someone, the way you should take to try and get the theist to fully have that burden of trying to actually qualify what a god was in the first place and taking it through that way. So that Flew's not believing wasn't particularly popular, but it seems to be what a lot of the lack of belief atheism is now based on. And I don't know if that's because people don't see the difference between not believing and lack of belief, or what, but Chesh says, did he explain who they is? I'm sorry, I need context.
Well, they want you to assume this position.
Oh, right.
Theists. He was talking about theists. In that, yeah. I don't know which ones he was talking about in particular, but yes, theists in general. So he did explain who they was, but not specifically any more specific than theists in general. Manny says, I don't care about how they define themselves, but I think it's a problem when they get mad when a philosopher says if atheism is true. We did an entire stream on that one, and Dave's got an article on if atheism is true. I mean, this is when you understand, if you understand atheism as the proposition God does not exist, then if atheism is true, then God does not exist. That's how it works. But they go, well, of course atheism is true because I lack belief, and lack belief is atheism. And you're just like,
and there are people that will go to the length of saying that this is a straw man of atheism, which is absurd, because like everyone understands, like at least the people that talk in these contexts, right? If you hear people like William Lane Craig say, oh no, therefore atheism is false, or a theist make this argument, they mean atheism as the proposition that God does not exist, which is the same as to say that theism is true, right? Because they are mutually, like, one is a negation of the other. So, like, why do you get triggered by this? They mean it in this way, and this is, as long as you understand the meaning, there's no sort of anything going on there. Right? They just, this is so pointless, in my opinion.
You can sort of get it from the context, and if you don't hold to that belief anyway, then it shouldn't really concern you.
Yeah, it shouldn't matter, right? Like, you don't define atheism that way, so be it. But the way they define it, it makes sense, and you would be completely wrong in saying, oh no, that is not a coherent statement, because in the way they mean it, it is absolutely 100% coherent.
Yeah.
Cafe says that he thinks Lactheus are dying off as they're being exposed by a pseudo intellectual bandwagon. I think some of that, it could be somewhat true. I don't know if it is, though. I think sometimes it's the method that it's being done in. It's really hard because of the way it's popularized, and some of the king atheists, the leaders that don't lead because the atheists aren't a community. I don't know, if I'm honest with you, if they're definitely dying out, but I am having possibly more and more interactions with other atheists online that have come round to how irrational the lack of belief atheism actually is, and the problems with the definition in lack of belief atheism. And he goes on to say Steve McRae's work has definitely contributed to exposing that pseudo-intellectual trend of Lactheism, and I definitely agree with that. Some of his arguments are absolutely fantastic. But it's also funny watching in the debate groups and things like that, and how some people just really throw their toys out the pram and really just refuse to even engage on any level with what's being said. It's crazy. And do you know what? Sometimes it's not even the way he's doing it. I have said to Steve, sometimes I think he goes in a bit too hot, but some of these people, I go in trying to be as calm and, you know, asking questions and everything like that, and I still get the exact same response as he does. So I can almost see why he does sort of shortcut the bullshit in the way that he does, and goes in hot sometimes, because it saves the long conversation that I have with someone to have them still throw their toys out of pram. Professor Griff, that's Alan, isn't it, says, simply what one believes is not sufficient to properly evaluate a proposition as true or false. Well, no, of course not. It's your attitude towards the proposition. I don't think anyone is saying that what you believe to be the case is definitely what the case is, but your justification for your belief is whether that belief is rational. Even then, that justification doesn't mean it's definitely true either way, but that's what we're talking about with a rational belief.
Unless you talk about this very specific term that I've had to deal with over the past couple of days, where if you believe that it, like if someone believes that it is the case, then it definitely is the case.
What?
Yeah,
What?
that happens. Yeah, for certain definitions of certain words.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh man, it's crazy. Welcome back, Leon. How did the train wreck end? It wasn't that bad. I think if I was to summarize it, the guy needs a little bit to look into the basics of propositional logic, the basics of epistemology. You know, what's beliefs, what's knowledge, justification, rationality. Not like a deep understanding, but more than Googling the definitions of these words.
He just needs to expand his circle beyond the YouTube atheism type stuff. That's all.
Yeah.
I'm sure the guy could probably formulate his ideas a little bit better. I think, as you say, he's basically got all of his ideas from the YouTube atheism style stuff, and that's.
He seems reasonable enough, at least from hearing him talk. So,
Yeah.
like, I hope he'll listen to this.
I hope so. And if he does, if you do listen to this Positively Atheist and you want to come on, feel free to join us.
Yeah.
Manny's winding you up, is he, Phil?
Oh my God! Like that is.
In philosophy, I'm only interested in evidence and logic.
That is an actual quote, people.
Oh no!
Ansrita says, why be nice and get all the crap anyway when Steve can start out as a mean poopy head and save time? Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I can understand that methodology, although I don't feel like it's something that I can necessarily do. I feel that if I'm trying to change someone's mind, then I've got to build a rapport with them, and I think that in general, I will have a better chance of reaching someone. But equally, I agree that with some of the people in some of the groups that we've been in, he does cut through a lot of the faff just by being direct with it. And he's not even necessarily like a dick from the outset. It's just like a bit monological. Here's the information. And then some people just fly off the handle straight away. Whereas I'll try and go in a little bit softer and have a conversation with someone, ask them what they think about that. Oh, and how do you define this? And what do you think about that? And and I'll get to the point, and we'll get all the way through a conversation, and we reach this bit where they suddenly realise that, oh shit, I'm contradicting myself, and that's when they fly off the handle at me, and it ends up the same anyway. And
I will say for Steve, he's never actually been like that with us.
No, he hasn't.
No, and again, like even when I was a atheist, right, I've interacted with him, and he was very, very polite with me. So I don't like. I don't think that Steve is this way with everyone, and I understand that if you interact with the same person like many times and then it just doesn't go anywhere, then at some point you just don't want to deal with them. But
Yeah.
like I feel like I agree with Joe as well, because like if I want to be consistent, I always maintain this idea that, you know, if you want to change someone's mind, you have to sort of be willing to engage with them and be polite with them. And so like in order to be consistent, I would have to say in this scenario as well that I believe that if someone is you know, a lacktheist, I would try to engage in the same way with them as well.
Yeah. No, and yeah. As you say though, as you both said, like we haven't had those same sort of negative interactions that other people have with Steve, but I think a lot of people are so instantly aggressive towards him because he'll say, well, you know, in philosophy, atheism is defined this way and agnosticism is defined that way, and they'll instantly go, you don't know what atheism is, blah blah blah, philosophy's dead, and that's they instantly go into attack mode. And he's not saying you can't define atheism as a lack of belief. He might point out the problems with it, but you know, he gets people being instantly angry at him straight away, and I think that's why he does sometimes just go in, well, here's the information, let's see how you react to it. So yeah, I get it. There is, see you, Manny, have yourself a good one.
Take it easy, Manny.
Yeah.
Cafe says, why do atheists demand empirical evidence for an immaterial God? There's another conundrum. I've said the same thing. What sort of physical evidence would you like for a metaphysical being? The only thing that you could really test is if this metaphysical being is said to affect the physical in a certain way, you should be able to detect that. But if it's not...
Yeah.
It's because most have this weird hard empiricist sort of view about how to gain knowledge.
Yeah. He says, perhaps it's due to the fact that most theism atheists don't simply lack belief, they lack basic philosophy and theology 101 to assume empirical evidence for an immaterial God.
Yeah, that is true.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
And Chesh says he could be a bit forward, maybe. And I like wasting my time. Confirmed. I really try not to now. I try to just stay off social media, and then I go on it and I get stuck for 2 days in a conversation that just goes nowhere. What was the one the other day? Someone said, how would you define this? And I said, well, if your position is you don't believe God exists, but you also don't believe God does not exist, then your position is agnostic. Someone quote tweeted me, told me I was redefining words, and I was like, well, no, that's exactly how agnosticism is used in philosophy, with atheism being the belief gods don't exist. Then told me I'm using archaic terminology. I was like, so am I redefining words or am I using archaic terminology for the words? You know, and then when I showed him a number of different dictionaries, I said, look, if you look in a dictionary, it defined a number of different ways. You can see the lack of belief atheism here, and you can see the belief gods don't exist here. It had 3 in there which had the belief gods don't exist, and he said those 3 backed up what his position on it was. And I'm like, so you agree with me that atheism is the belief gods don't exist, yet you're telling me it's an archaic terminology that I've just redefined. What the fuck is your position here? Some people... Yeah, well, there's so many atheists on the internet are so heuristic, they just fight. They just fight. And each line is a different battle. Ha-ha, I won that one. Ha-ha, I won that one. Ha-ha, I won that one. And they're not even following the entire conversation through. It's so frustrating being associated with these people.
Yeah.
Chesh reckons that she's more mean than Steve is. I haven't seen that side of you.
I haven't.
No.
Me neither.
So that must be quite fun. LB says, honest question. When an atheist says, I don't believe in God or gods the same way I don't believe in fairies or Santa Claus, is that the same as saying God does not exist? Well, it depends. Are they saying fairies are imaginary? Are they saying that they're mythical creatures? If so, yes, they are saying it in the same way that they believe gods don't exist. Or if they're actually just saying they only lack belief in Santa and they only lack belief in fairies, then I'd say they're holding an incredibly irrational position, because these things are, mythological creatures. So it depends on context with that one, I'd say, LB.
Yeah. I mean, if you're reducing it to just having a certain psychological state towards some idea, then they could be identical, I guess. But if you're talking about reasoning in the categories of things that the idea exists in, then no.
Faye says, I originally heard that quote from Aaron Ra, and then a dozen of atheist parrots followed. He's talking to LB on that one. Yeah, that's one of the most disappointing things I find with the atheist community that's not a community and doesn't have leaders, that they follow these leaders and parrot what they say in an almost dogmatic way with the dogma that they don't have. It's like, I think a lot of these lack of belief atheists must come from quite fundamentalist theistic backgrounds, and therefore they're sort of still stuck in that mindset. And even though they say they don't have a community, they act as if they are. And even though they say they don't have any doctrine, they have a list of doctrine. They act in a dogmatic way with a certain set of behaviors that they see that their leaders that they say they don't have doing. And it's almost amusing looking from the outside into it, just like, are you all really that, unaware of your own behaviors? Do you really not know what you're doing? Do you really not know how this looks? No wonder so many theists say atheism is a religion, because you're all acting like you're in a religion. Atheism is not a religion, right? It's not. But the way you guys are behaving, it seems like you're in one. LB says, when I push them harder on questions, well, they don't explicitly say it. They often say it's a gotcha question or remark. Yeah, that's been something that I've noticed more and more people saying recently, like, oh, that's just a gotcha question. No, it's not. Answer the question. Like, you just don't want to answer because you realise that you're going to trip your own self up. It's not a gotcha question. I'm asking questions as part of the conversation. If you feel it's a gotcha question, then perhaps you've realised you're in the wrong somewhere, isn't there?
Yeah. I mean, there are valid gotcha question attempts.
Of course.
But not all of them are. Yeah, if people are saying that, then they're kind of stretching what it means for a gotcha question to be a gotcha question.
Yeah. I think you got a few yesterday on Twitter, didn't you? I can't remember the actual conversation.
Yeah. Quite a few. Yeah.
But it was just every other thing you're saying. So, but like, can you explain this to me? Or can you explain why you think this? That's a gotcha question.
Yeah.
No, no, it's not. I'm asking you to explain why you think this. Like,
I'll actually try to understand why they think that it is a gotcha question, right?
Yeah.
But that apparently is in of it itself a gotcha question, according to these people, something like that. So it's like, wait, what questions can I ask you that are not gotcha questions? Like,
that's another gotcha question, Philip.
Yeah, that's another gotcha question. Yeah.
Yeah, of all the people least likely to ask a gotcha question, it's Philip.
Probably, I don't know.
Oh, no, definitely. Yeah.
And the person most likely to do it is Dave, but you wouldn't realise he was doing it because he's that good at asking them.
I don't know what you mean.
We are just finishing up, Luke. Sorry. We're just doing the questions and statements at the end. As Chesh says, perhaps you realise that you just got it. Faye says they think they're being cornered. I tried to get Eric Murphy, who recently quit Talk Heathen, to answer a question of mine, and instead of answering, he kept repeating, "Is Is good a gotcha moment for you? Yeah, so that's basically akin to what we were just saying as well. I mean, there are so many that just say, this whole, is this a good gotcha moment for you? That makes more sense. Thank you for clarifying, Cafe. I sort of got what you were saying, but yeah. Is this a gotcha moment for you? But they sort of do that. They're like, oh, look, someone's asking me a question. It's a gotcha. No, it's just a question. If you realize that actually there's something internally wrong there, then it's not because it's a gotcha. It's just because you've realized that there might be something wrong in your own cognitive process. And I suppose that's pride and ego getting in the way, and it does do that. And sometimes I can understand, in the moment, especially if you're having a heated conversation, you might need some time to cool off and think about it and come back to it another day and go, actually, yeah, no, sorry, I get what you mean. I mean, that happens to me sometimes. There are times when, I'm not as receptive as others. There's certain people I'm less receptive to than others, because they've spent a lot of time burning bridges with me, and I've just got to a point where I just don't listen to anything they say, even if they could be right. I'm just like, do you know what? Fuck you. You're clearly wrong because you're an arsehole. Which goes back to what I was saying about the whole treating people with respect. If you want to change someone's mind, you build a rapport with them, you have a good conversation with them. You don't just put everything on them that they're the one that's wrong. You have to be open. You have to have a dialectic conversation that goes both ways. You discuss things and you're both searching for the truth of the matter in the conversation rather than just, I'm right, you're wrong. So, Luke's got a question. He says, is B or not B a true dichotomy?
Yes, it is. If B is a proposition, then it is. Absolutely it is.
Yeah, so what are you using B there? Are you using B as belief, or are you using B as a proposition? But you could say belief and not belief is a true dichotomy. If we were talking about the propositions earlier, so where we were saying like a proposition is true or false. So let's just go with the light switch because it's really easy. It's on or it's off. Okay, so if you're thinking about your belief in that situation, for the light switch to be on, you either believe it or you don't, and the light switch to be off, you either don't believe it or you do, or you could not believe both ways in that regard. But you could say that if you're only answering half of the proposition, you only believe or don't believe that particular part of the proposition.
Yeah, but like this is true for all propositions in classical logic, right? Whatever the proposition is, if you have the proposition and its negation, it's going to be a true dichotomy every time. There's no middle.
There's no middle. Yeah,
the law of excluded middle. So for any proposition that you form, P and not or not P is going to be a true dichotomy. But I get what you're trying to say anyway, Joe, because like belief is not in and of itself a proposition. It's missing a piece, and so it's more complicated than that for certain things. Like even if you want to say like for example, X can believe in God, or X cannot believe in God, or something like that, right? And you could apply that to rocks, for example. That's why I was saying that you need sort of this implicit or explicit part in the definition that restricts it to the things. But it's still going to be true that sort of predicate is going to either be true or false for anything that it is applied to. So yeah, it's just a matter of how you define these words.
Yeah. Does that help you, Luke, or do you have any subsequent question on that one? He says he's answered the questions for Thursday. So I don't know if any of you have seen them around. So on Twitter and in a couple of Facebook groups, we have put up a list of 10 questions, just asking about philosophy, basically. for atheists, so how atheists view philosophy, how they view different arguments and things like that. We're not necessarily going to be going too deep into things like the Kalam cosmological argument. The question on that one is the Kalam cosmological argument valid? You know, we might broach the Kalam in a stream again in the future. We have done it in the past, but it might be worth doing an entire stream on it in the future. But that isn't, you know, the purpose of this stream. It's just talking about philosophy in the atheist community and how many atheists view philosophy. You know, and that includes things like logic, justification, etc., etc. Hey Randolph, good to see you. We're just finishing up actually, but yeah, sorry, we're just doing the end of thing questions. LB says either to Luke or us. I think he got accused at some point on Twitter for being a theist troll. I have many
not
times.
alone. Yeah. You're in good company.
Yeah, Ricky Gervais was wrong on atheists not accusing other atheists for not believing or agreeing at the other time with all other atheists. It's true. I mean, you can simply say that, you know, you hold a different position on certain topics and you become a theist troll. You try and explain epistemic justification and how it applies to, you know, all belief positions when you're answering something. It might only be internal because you're not necessarily trying to convince someone else, but you do need this justification to hold a rational position, and they'll call you a theist troll. And you're like, what? You know, what? Oh, you're doing renovations. What are you doing renovations on? Yeah, so if you want to know about the propositions, the key thing to remember is a proposition can be true or false, but the attitude towards the proposition isn't necessarily true or false. What you're doing is you're giving a read on what you think about it being true and what you think about it being false. So you could believe it true and not believe it false. You can not believe it true and believe it false, or you could not believe it true and not believe it false. For the rational positions, and we did mention earlier on in the stream that you could hold a contradictory position where you believe it both ways. Oh, there you go. There's an introduction to logic there. I actually did a pre-introduction to logic on the site the other day and released that. It's a very, very, very basic overview of validity and soundness and things like that. Language, truth, and logic.
Nice. That's actually a book that I haven't seen yet.
Oh, it's brilliant, fantastic book.
We're going to be running a competition to give away Dave's book collection.
This is why it's good to be in the back room now. Yeah. I can just go, you need to read this book.
Is this your new permanent location, is it, Dave, when we're doing the streams?
Hopefully.
Awesome.
Yeah, hopefully.
Yeah, it's pretty nice.
Yeah, so Randolph, you can reject the first premise of the Kalam, but is the argument still valid? Is what we're saying. Is the Kalam logically valid? So that's the question on the thing. But I don't know. You can either see it on Twitter or one of the Facebook groups that we've posted it in. We've posted it in the Great Debate community. We've posted it in Answers in Reason and a couple of other atheist and theist groups. It's just a list of 10 questions. Are you getting your COVID-19 vaccine tomorrow? Good. Yeah, I got mine on Friday. And I was very, very lucky that I got no side effects from it, really, other than increased insomnia. And I was a little bit lightheaded. Like, it felt like I was tipsy the entire evening. It was kind of fun, but it just made me want to drink more. But I also didn't drink anything just in case there was an additional reaction. I waited until the following day. But yeah, I've known some people that have had some pretty bad reactions to the jab. But the same been with COVID, hasn't it? There are some people who've had absolutely terrible times, and some people go, I didn't feel anything from it. I've got the infection, but I'm completely asymptomatic. Very, 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 very weird viruses.
Randolph, you should check out when we cut it off, you should check out the stream. I highly recommend.
Yeah.
Maybe you're gonna find something to think about.
Actually, Randolph, if you want a basic overview of logic as well, propositions, I'll drop it in the chat right now. So this is a basic overview for how propositions work. And what was the new one called? The pre thingy. It was today's article. It's going to be on the front page. Why am I being such a mong? Because it's late and I can't think anymore. I've done my thinking for the evening.
What do you mean anymore?
Yeah, fair. What does it mean to be logical? There we go. So this second article I'm going to put in the chat is a pre-intro to logic. So it talks about validity and soundness and rationality, and it basically does it as a comparison to playing a game of chess. So it is a little bit of a stretched metaphor, but it works, I guess.
It gives a good basic understanding.
Yeah, it gives you a good idea of the difference. Yeah.
You put your brain in a blender this afternoon. Does that mean you got really high? Or did you actually just take it out? Hang on, you're a goblin, not a zombie. You can't take your brain out. Right, well, I don't think there's any more questions or statements, unless I missed some. Luke's just been reading the logic chapter of his new book by Begini, so getting a handle on it all is going to be putting me in my place in no time.
Julian Begini is a fantastic writer, though.
Yeah. Chesh says, "You don't know me. You're not my real dad." It's called How the World Thinks. You got that one, Dave?
No.
There you go. So you're going to do us a book review on the next stream. So we're not going to be doing a SciPhi. We're going to have to just do another SciPhi. Yes, I assumed that was the book name, Luke. You had it in apostrophes and everything. Cool. Okay, so Thursday's stream is going to be, discussing atheism and philosophy and the relation of atheism to and atheists in. Oh, fucking hell! I can't speak anymore. Thursday's stream is going to be the relationship that atheists have with philosophy. So philosophy in the atheist community, should I say. And then next week, we're not actually going to be streaming. Well, you guys can stream if you want, but I am going to be without a computer. Everything is being packed up this Sunday and moved into the new house, but we're not actually moving the last few bits out until next Wednesday, Thursday, and then I'll be moved down into the new house on Friday. So I will still be available online because obviously I can interact using this thing. If I've got time, there's a couple of videos that I'm going to post out and release on our usual show times for both Thursday and Friday next week. Tuesday and Thursday next week. Tuesdays should be on free will if I have the time to edit that video, and Thursdays is just a little bit of a clip show, which I've already done and scheduled. So hopefully next week you'll still have some new content.
But you should prove that, right? These are just assertions. Like, why would I believe them?
Well,
why would you believe them without proof? Like, I don't see.
Are you guys justified in believing that I've scheduled a clip show for next Thursday? Do you think you'd be justified in thinking that? And are you justified in me saying that I have a free will episode recorded but not edited, ready for upload? Would you be justified in believing either of those statements? How would you justify that? Or do you just lack belief in those propositions?
There's no proof. No proof of that. No.
You were there, man. Yes, hopefully it is a better place. It's we're moving into a bungalow, but it's in Bournemouth, so I'll be closer to the seaside, which would be nice. And it's got better internet, and it's cheaper. It's smaller, obviously, so it's going to be cheaper. And it's out of London because I'm in Surrey, but Surrey, London, same sort of prices. Not obviously to central London, but yes. COVID has destroyed my finances, and I needed to move, and we're moving close to where the wife's family lives, so that once the kids are a little bit older, we've got some help looking after the kids so she can return to work. All really boring reasons to actually move. I wish it was we won the lottery and we're moving to Australia or something like that, but you know.
You forgot to give the bodies the patio reason.
Would love to hear what you guys about mine today, and when Positively Atheist called in the other day, and tomorrow's. We shall check it out, Chesh, as soon as we can.
And don't forget to go watch Chesh's stream that she did tonight on the article that he linked, Positively Atheist linked to in his YouTube video.
Oh, is that the article? Is that the one that she covered off tonight? Ah, okay.
Yeah.
Yes, then definitely check that out. Is that the one that you were talking about, Chesh? Earlier on when you said check it out. No, don't check it out. I couldn't work out what you were talking about, so I didn't read it out. Sorry. No proof of Dave changing my mind on anything. No proof at all. No. Never happened. He didn't just sit there for 90 minutes and then say one thing at the end of the stream. In fact, we should just put that bit out there. Like, forget the whole 90-minute conversation. There you go. That's the free will conversation over. If I win lots of money, yes, we'll do a world tour and we'll grab all the answers in reason lot from around the world, and we'll do a show in every city we visit.
I thought you were going to say we're going to do coke. I was all on board until you...
Brilliant. Okay, cool. I am going to end it all there, though. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Hopefully, we'll see you all on Thursday. Hopefully, you'll answer some of those questions, or at least give some of your feedback on what you think about philosophy in one of the many threads, either on Facebook or on Twitter, that we've posted. And thank you very much for just being you guys out there and listening to us and supporting us. We really appreciate it, especially all of you that interact in the chat and have subscribed and everything like that. Honestly, really, really, really appreciate it. So, you've been watching the Fresh Air Sci-Fi show. I'm Joe.
I'm Dave.
And I'm Philip.
Have a good night, all.
Good night, all.
Good night.